My name is Charmaine. I am 35 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful software developer, I escaped their toxicity, but the universe had one more massive test for me. I thought my money and my success bought me respect. I was completely wrong. I arrived at the airport with my bags packed for a luxury anniversary vacation, out of nowhere. My husband's 23-year-old daughter snatched my passport right out of my hand and said, "You are not going to Venice. You are staying home to watch my dogs for me." I walked straight to the ticket counter, and by the time they checked in, their entire world was about to collapse. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to people who underestimated your worth and tried to use you as their personal ATM. Growing up, I learned early that nobody hands you anything in this world. I spent my teenage years writing code in my cramped bedroom while other kids were out at parties. Now I run my own highly profitable software development firm. My business is structured as an LLC that strictly protects my assets, a vital lesson I learned the hard way in my 20s. I am self-made, completely financially independent, and I thought I had built a beautiful, secure life with my husband Jamal. Jamal is 48 years old, a regional bank manager who looks like he belongs on the cover of a luxury lifestyle magazine. On paper, we were the ultimate modern power couple. We attended charity galas together, hosted elegant Sunday dinners, and presented a flawless image to our community. I owned the massive house we lived in. I owned the luxury cars we drove. I allowed Jamal to act like the undisputed king of the castle because I genuinely wanted peace, but I never gave up the actual keys to my kingdom. Behind closed doors, there was always a massive shadow looming over our marriage. That shadow was Kiara, his incredibly entitled daughter from a previous relationship. For years, I played the role of the endlessly supportive stepmother. I paid off Kiara's massive student loans. I bought her a reliable car when she recklessly wrecked hers. I even financed her ridiculous ongoing attempts to become a social media lifestyle influencer. She has never worked a real job a single day in her life. She spends her days unboxing promotional packages and complaining about how hard her life is to her meager 5,000 followers. I did all of this financial heavy lifting because I loved Jamal and I desperately wanted our blended family to work. But no matter how much money I poured into Kiara's life, she always looked at me with thinly veiled contempt. She saw me as nothing more than an annoying obstacle between her and her father's undivided attention and, more importantly, his wallet. It was a crisp Tuesday morning, the kind of morning that feels full of bright promise and excitement. Jamal and I were at John F. Kennedy International Airport, standing in the exclusive Delta VIP check-in lounge. I had meticulously planned this 2-week trip to Venice to celebrate our 5-year wedding anniversary. And when I say I planned it, I mean I paid for every single cent of it through my company account. First-class flights with lay-flat beds, a $2,000 a night luxury suite at the legendary Amman Venice Hotel, private gondola tours with catered champagne. I wanted to celebrate our love and my recent major business milestones. I was standing near the pristine marble counter, sipping a complimentary sparkling water, admiring my husband in his tailored navy suit. I felt genuinely happy and relaxed. I honestly thought we were finally going to get some romantic, uninterrupted time away from the intense stress of our daily lives. The serene, hushed atmosphere of the VIP lounge was suddenly shattered by the chaotic sound of frantic barking and the loud clattering of heavy paws on the polished floor. I turned around and felt my stomach drop straight into my designer shoes. Kiara was marching directly toward us. She was wearing oversized designer sunglasses indoors, struggling to drag 3 massive, completely untrained French bulldogs on tangled leashes. These dogs were absolute terrors. They were jumping on other wealthy passengers, knocking over a velvet rope display stand and causing an absolute embarrassing public scene. One of the dogs actually hiked its leg and urinated on a nearby potted plant right in the middle of the luxury lounge. The airline staff were already glaring in our direction, horrified by the massive disruption. Before I could even open my mouth to ask what on earth she was doing at the airport on a Tuesday morning, Kiara aggressively shoved the tangled dog leashes directly into my husband's hands. Then she lunged toward me. With a swift, incredibly hostile motion, she snatched my luxury leather travel wallet right out of my hands. My passport, my first-class boarding pass, my luggage claim tickets, absolutely everything was inside it. I stood there completely shocked by the sheer audacity of her physical aggression. I firmly demanded to know what she thought she was doing. She pushed her sunglasses down the bridge of her nose, looked me up and down with absolute unfiltered disgust, and let out a cruel, mocking smirk. Dad said I needed a break, Kiara announced loudly, intentionally, raising her voice to make sure the other wealthy travelers in the lounge could hear her. I have been so incredibly stressed about my social media brand deals falling through. So I am taking your ticket. You have had more than enough luxury vacations in your life. You need to take my dogs back to your house and watch them for me while we are gone. I literally laughed out loud. The sound echoed awkwardly in the quiet lounge. I honestly thought it was a terrible, tasteless joke. I turned my head to look at Jamal, fully expecting him to step up, discipline his unruly daughter, and hand my travel wallet right back to me. I waited for the man I married, the man whose lavish lifestyle I heavily subsidized every single month to defend his wife. Instead, Jamal refused to even look me in the eye. He stared nervously at the floor, sighed heavily, adjusted his expensive silk tie, and placed a sweaty, trembling hand on my shoulder. Charmaine, Jamal said softly, his voice dripping with pathetic cowardice. Come on, baby. Just be the bigger person here. Kiara is really going through a lot of emotional stress right now. Her mental health is very fragile. She needs this luxury getaway to Italy much more than you do right now. Just catch a premium Uber home and take the dogs with you. I promise I will make it up to you. I will take you somewhere nice next month, just the two of us. The silence that followed his words was absolutely deafening. It felt like all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of the entire airport terminal. My brain raced to process the sheer magnitude of his disrespect. He actually wanted me to step aside and give up a $30,000 luxury anniversary vacation that I paid for with my own hard-earned money just so his spoiled, ungrateful daughter could take my place. He wanted me to become a free, unpaid pet sitter for 3 destructive, chaotic dogs. And he was doing all of this in public, banking on the fact that I would shrink myself and comply just to avoid making a loud scene. In that exact crystal clear moment, the heavy blinders fell from my eyes forever. I realized that Jamal did not love me. He loved what my success could provide for him and his child. I was not his equal partner in life. I was just his personal bank account. I was the strong woman expected to carry all the burdens while they eagerly reaped all the rich rewards. I did not yell, I did not scream or cause a public scene, I did not shed a single tear. Crying is for women who do not have a solid backup plan, and I am a master software engineer. My entire life and career are built on finding immediate, ruthless solutions to catastrophic systemic errors. I looked at Kiara, who was standing there with a smug, victorious grin plastered across her face, eagerly waiting for me to break down in defeat. Then I looked at Jamal, who was giving me a pathetic, pleading look, hoping his charming smile would work its usual manipulative magic. I reached out my hand and calmly, forcefully pulled my travel wallet right back out of Kiara's tight grip. I opened it, removed my passport, and slipped it safely into my purse. Then I handed the printed boarding pass back to her. I smiled the warmest, most terrifyingly calm smile I have ever mustered in my 35 years of living. You know what I said? My voice perfectly smooth and dangerously steady. You are absolutely right. You do need a break. Have a great time in Venice, both of you. Jamal breathed a huge, audible sigh of relief, completely misreading my absolute calmness for weak submission. Thank you, Charmaine, he beamed brightly. I knew you would understand. You are the best wife ever. As I walked away, I could hear them celebrating loudly behind me. Kiara was excitedly bragging about all the designer shopping she was going to do in Italy, and Jamal was eagerly telling her to make sure she got good pictures for her social media. They were completely oblivious to the massive hurricane that was about to hit them. Every single step I took felt like shedding a heavy, suffocating weight. For 5 long years I had compromised my own happiness to keep the peace in a home that did not respect me. I turned on my heel, my designer shoes clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. I did not walk toward the exit doors. I did not pull out my phone to call an Uber. I walked straight past the security checkpoint line and headed directly toward the main VIP customer service counter. My mind was operating with terrifying clarity. They wanted to play stupid games with my money and my precious time, but they forgot one crucial, undeniable detail. I was the primary account holder. I held the premium credit card that booked this entire fantasy, and I was about to hit the delete key on their entire reality. I approached the polished mahogany counter of the Delta VIP assistance desk. The customer service agent, a sharply dressed woman with a gold name tag that read, Brenda, looked up from her computer monitor with a warm, highly professional smile. She recognized me almost immediately because I fly international first class for my corporate business at least 6 times a year out of this exact terminal. Good morning, Mrs. Hayes, Brenda said warmly, folding her hands on the counter. How can I assist you with your travels today? I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out my wallet. I extracted my heavy, solid metal black American Express card and placed it softly onto the smooth surface of the counter. Good morning, Brenda. I need to make some immediate and permanent modifications to my current travel itinerary, I replied, making sure my voice was completely devoid of any emotion. I need to absolutely cancel the 2 passenger tickets currently issued under the names Jamal Hayes and Kiara Hayes for the outbound flight to Venice today. Brenda raised a professionally sculpted eyebrow, but did not miss a beat. She immediately began typing rapidly on her keyboard, her eyes scanning the complex airline reservation screen. Certainly, Mrs. Hayes. Just to confirm your request, you want to entirely cancel those 2 specific passenger tickets. Because of your premium medallion status, I can easily issue future flight credits in their names for the full value of the fare. I smiled, offering her a cold, razor-sharp smile that conveyed exactly how I felt about that suggestion. Absolutely not, I instructed clearly. Those first-class tickets were purchased directly on my corporate company account. I want a full, complete refund routed directly back to the original method of payment. Do not leave a single penny of flight credit in their names. Erase them from the system entirely. Brenda nodded in quiet understanding, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Consider it done right now, she said efficiently, hitting the enter key with a satisfying click. The funds will be credited back to your corporate account within 3 to 5 business days. Now, what would you like me to do regarding your personal ticket to Venice? I paused for a brief moment, letting the heavy reality of my newly reclaimed freedom wash over me. For the first time in 5 years, I was not compromising my desires for a man who refused to protect me. Cancel my Venice ticket as well, I instructed firmly. But please keep my flight account open. I need to make a few quick phone calls before I decide my exact next destination. While Brenda diligently processed the final flight cancellations, I pulled my smartphone out of my purse. I had an entire painstakingly planned luxury ecosystem to aggressively dismantle. First, I called the exclusive Aman Venice Hotel. I had booked their signature Grand Canal luxury suite for our stay. The concierge answered politely in accented English. I gave him my reservation confirmation number and canceled the entire 2-week stay without a second thought. I honestly did not care about the hefty late cancellation financial penalty. It was a remarkably small price to pay to definitively cut off my husband's unauthorized international joyride. Next, I canceled the private luxury water taxi I had reserved to personally pick us up from Marco Polo Airport. I canceled the highly exclusive privately guided wine tasting tour in the remote Veneto region. I canceled the 3 separate private Michelin star dinner reservations I had spent months aggressively securing through my high-net-worth networking contacts. With every single calculated tap on my glowing phone screen, I was systematically defunding Jamal's grand, arrogant illusion. He genuinely thought he could just step into the opulent luxury life I built from scratch and hand it over to his spoiled, ungrateful daughter. He was about to learn a very hard lesson. The Bank of Charmaine was officially and permanently closed. I turned my attention back to Brenda, who was patiently waiting behind the counter for my next move. Are there any premium first-class seats available on the absolute next flight out to Paris? I asked calmly. Brenda typed quickly, her eyes darting across the available flight schedules. You have excellent timing, Mrs. Hayes. We have exactly one seat left in the Delta One premium cabin on a direct flight to Charles de Gaulle Airport. It boards at gate 42 in exactly 45 minutes. I slid my heavy black card a few inches closer to her. Book it right now, I said, without a single ounce of hesitation. I have always deeply loved Paris in the spring. It is a beautiful city that inherently respects a woman who clearly knows her own financial and emotional worth. Within 3 short minutes, my brand new freshly printed boarding pass was handed directly to me. I thanked Brenda, sincerely tipped her very generously in cash for her swift and silent discretion, and walked away from the VIP counter. I felt incredibly lighter than I had in years. The heavy, suffocating daily burden of trying to constantly please a fundamentally ungrateful husband and an openly hostile stepdaughter had simply vanished into the airport air. I took the private glass-enclosed elevator up to the Delta Sky Club. Because I was flying international first class and held the absolute highest airline loyalty status, I bypassed the regular crowded lounge area and entered the exclusive ultra-premium VIP section reserved for top-tier clients. It was blissfully quiet inside, smelling deeply of fresh, dark roast espresso and expensive polished leather furniture. I walked straight over to the expansive floor-to-ceiling glass windows that brilliantly overlooked the main terminal concourse below. More importantly, these massive windows offered a perfect, completely unobstructed bird's-eye view of the main TSA security screening checkpoint. I selectively chose a plush, deep blue velvet armchair right up against the glass. A sharply dressed lounge attendant appeared almost instantly at my side. "A tall glass of your absolute best vintage champagne, please," I requested politely. "And perhaps a small plate of fresh strawberries." He returned mere moments later, carrying a perfectly chilled crystal flute of premium champagne on a silver tray. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The crisp, expensive bubbles danced playfully on my tongue. I crossed my legs, settled deeply into my comfortable velvet chair, and looked down at the sprawling security lines below me. It was finally time for the main event. Down below on the main floor, the vast terminal was bustling with hundreds of frantic, stressed travelers. But it honestly did not take me very long to spot my immediate family members in the crowd. Jamal and Kiara were incredibly hard to miss. Kiara was still aggressively struggling with those 3 unruly, poorly trained French bulldogs, literally dragging them by their expensive designer leashes toward the premium TSA pre-check lane. Jamal was walking a few confident steps ahead of her, his chest puffed out broadly, looking incredibly pleased with himself. He was actually wearing his expensive designer sunglasses indoors, casually carrying the custom Italian leather duffel bag I bought him for his birthday last year. He truly believed in his heart that he had won the ultimate victory. He thought he had successfully bullied his wealthy wife into total submission, secured a free luxury European vacation for his bratty daughter, and maintained his dominant, unquestioned position in our marriage. "Oh, Jamal, you beautiful, arrogant, incredibly foolish man." I watched with extreme fascination as they finally approached the very front of the VIP security line. The TSA agent on duty, a stern-looking, broad-shouldered man, who clearly had absolutely no daily patience for traveler nonsense, held his hand up flat to firmly stop them. Jamal casually handed over his driver's license and held out the digital boarding pass on his smartphone with a highly confident, deeply arrogant smirk. He probably fully expected the security agent to welcome him warmly by name and immediately usher him straight through the VIP screening lane. I leaned forward in my plush velvet chair, gently swirling the pale golden champagne in my crystal glass. I absolutely did not want to miss a single glorious second of this impending disaster. The TSA agent placed the scanning device over Jamal's glowing phone screen. Even from my high vantage point up in the lounge, I could vividly see the exact moment the airline security system completely rejected him. The digital scanner flashed a bright, undeniable, blinding red light. The agent frowned deeply, looked closely at his computer screen, and then looked right back up at Jamal. He shook his head firmly and handed the smartphone back. Jamal looked entirely confused. He aggressively pointed at his phone screen, then pointed emphatically toward the VIP security lane, clearly trying to loudly explain that he was a premium first-class passenger. He demanded the agent scan the phone a second time. The agent sighed heavily and scanned it again. Another bright red light flashed. The TSA agent's physical posture immediately grew rigid. He stepped out from behind his small podium and firmly crossed his arms across his chest, blocking the pathway. I took another delightful, refreshing sip of my expensive champagne. Kiara impatiently pushed her way forward, her three dogs barking loudly and badly, tangling their leashes around the metal security stanchions. She aggressively shoved her own smartphone directly at the tired agent, clearly deeply annoyed that her father was somehow holding up her glamorous, highly anticipated international trip. The agent sighed and scanned Kiara's boarding pass. Another bright red light illuminated the podium. Now the real panic finally began to set in. Jamal's highly confident, puffed-up posture completely evaporated into thin air. I could see him frantically swiping his thumb on his phone screen, desperately refreshing his airline application over and over again. But there was absolutely nothing left for him to refresh. His luxury itinerary was entirely gone. His flight confirmation numbers were completely void. His entire European fantasy vacation had been aggressively erased from digital existence. He immediately started arguing loudly with the TSA agent. He was waving his arms wildly in the air, pointing furiously at his expensive luxury watch, demanding at the top of his lungs to speak to a senior airport supervisor. It was the absolute classic textbook entitled Meltdown. Meanwhile, Kiara was throwing a full-blown spectacular temper tantrum right in the middle of the airport. She was stomping her expensive sneakers on the floor, yelling viciously at her father, and aggressively yanking on the poor dog's leashes. The surrounding passengers, waiting in the long security line, were all stopping to stare at them. Several people were actually pulling out their own smartphones to happily record the highly embarrassing, chaotic, public spectacle. Jamal, the dignified bank manager, who always cared so deeply and obsessively about his flawless public image, was making a complete, undeniable fool of himself in the exact center of John F. Kennedy Airport. A senior T.S. A supervisor finally arrived on the scene, flanked by two large, heavily armed airport police officers. They absolutely did not care about Jamal's expensive, tailored Navy suit or his loud, arrogant demands. They sternly directed both him and Kiara to immediately step entirely out of the security line and move away to the back of the terminal. They were actively blocking the queue, causing a massive public disturbance and holding completely invalid flight tickets. They were officially and publicly rejected. I sat comfortably behind the soundproof glass and watched my husband, a man who had just confidently told me to take a cheap Uber home, like a dismissed unpaid servant being aggressively escorted away by armed airport security, like a common trespasser. His broad shoulders were deeply slumped in heavy defeat. His face was flushed a deep crimson red with overwhelming public humiliation. Kiara was trailing miserably behind him, crying loudly and uncontrollably, her expensive designer luggage dragging sadly across the polished terminal floor. Ladies, have you ever watched a grown man realize his free ride just got towed? Drop a wine glass emoji in the comments because the public meltdown was absolutely glorious. My phone began to buzz violently in my purse. I glanced down at the screen. It was Jamal calling. I smiled, silenced the incoming call, and picked up my designer carry-on bag. My flight to Paris was officially boarding, and I had a fabulous European city waiting just for me. The Delta One suite was a sanctuary of peace. I reclined my premium seat into a fully flat bed, pulled the plush luxury duvet up to my chin, and slept more soundly than I had in 5 entire years. While my husband and his entitled daughter were likely dragging their heavy luggage back to a cramped Uber in total humiliation, I was soaring high above the clouds, completely detached from their toxic reality. When the plane finally touched down at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, the morning sun was just beginning to paint the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold. I grabbed my designer carry-on bag, breezed through French customs with absolute ease, and stepped into the crisp European air. A sharply dressed private chauffeur was already waiting for me, holding a sleek black umbrella and a sign with my last name. He escorted me to a waiting Mercedes luxury sedan. It was not until I was comfortably seated in the back of the plush leather interior that I finally decided to turn my smartphone off airplane mode. The absolute second my phone connected to the international cellular network, the device practically vibrated out of my hand. The screen completely froze for a few seconds as a massive avalanche of notifications flooded my home screen. I looked down and almost laughed out loud. I had exactly 47 missed calls. There were 15 desperate calls from Jamal, 10 angry calls from Kiara, and the rest were a chaotic mix of calls from my husband's deeply toxic family members, primarily led by his older sister, Auntie Valerie. In our community, Auntie Valerie is the classic textbook definition of a hypocritical elder. She is the woman who sits in the absolute front row at church every single Sunday morning, wearing massive, brightly colored designer hats and loudly shouting amen at the pastor. But the second she leaves the sanctuary, she is the most vicious, judgmental, and blindly loyal enabler you will ever meet. She always defended Jamal's terrible behavior because he was the precious golden boy of their family. I tapped my screen and opened my voicemail inbox. Auntie Valerie had left a scathing, incredibly loud 2-minute message. I pressed play and held the phone slightly away from my ear as her shrill voice filled the quiet cabin of my luxury car. "Charmaine, how dare you embarrass my brother at the airport like that?" Her voice dripped with raw venom and unwarranted self-righteousness. "He is a good, hard-working black man who provides a roof over your head. You made him look like an absolute fool in front of all those wealthy white folks at the security checkpoint. Kiara is just a child going through a hard time. You are supposed to be the adult. You are acting like a cold-hearted, wicked stepmother. You need to turn your behind around, get on the next flight home, feed those poor dogs, and beg my brother for his forgiveness. If you ruin this marriage over a simple misunderstanding, the Lord will handle you." I casually deleted the threatening voicemail before she even finished her final breathless sentence. The sheer delusion was absolutely staggering. Jamal providing a roof over my head. That was the funniest thing I had heard all week. I bought our sprawling 4-bedroom colonial house through my own corporate entity 2 entire years before Jamal even managed to buy an engagement ring. His name was nowhere near the property deed, but his fragile male ego had forced him to lie to his entire family, claiming he bought the estate to take care of me. I had always kept my mouth shut to protect his pride. That courtesy was now officially revoked. I switched over to my text messages. Jamal had sent a long string of highly manipulative texts, shifting rapidly from furious anger to pathetic begging. But it was his final message sent just 3 hours ago that made my eyes narrow in cold calculation. "Since you decided to throw a massive temper tantrum and ruin our anniversary trip, Kiara and I are at your house. We left her 3 dogs inside the living room. I am taking Kiara out to lunch to calm her down. Do not expect us to clean up whatever mess those dogs make. You brought this entirely on yourself by being so selfish. Call me the second you land so we can fix this." He purposely left 3 untrained, hyperactive French bulldogs completely loose inside my meticulously decorated home. A home filled with imported Italian silk rugs, custom velvet furniture, and irreplaceable antique decor. He thought causing expensive property damage would somehow force me to submit to his authority. He truly believed I would panic, fly right back to America, and start desperately scrubbing my own floors like a punished servant. My private car pulled up to the magnificent entrance of the Hotel Plaza Athénée. The liveried doorman immediately rushed forward to open my door and gather my luggage. I checked into my breathtaking luxury suite, which featured a stunning, unobstructed view of the Eiffel Tower sparkling against the morning sky. I walked straight past the complimentary bottle of premium champagne waiting on the marble table. I stepped out onto the wrought iron balcony, letting the cool Parisian breeze wash over my face, and opened the smart home security application on my phone. I had installed high-definition interior security cameras throughout the main living areas of my house a year ago. Jamal knew they were there, but he was incredibly lazy with technology and completely forgot that they recorded crystal-clear audio alongside the video feed. I tapped the living room camera feed and waited for the high-resolution video to load. The live image appeared on my glowing screen, and my heart immediately hardened into solid ice. My magnificent custom-designed navy blue velvet sofa was completely shredded. White foam stuffing was scattered everywhere across the expensive hardwood floor like dirty snow. One of the dogs was actively chewing on the leg of my irreplaceable vintage coffee table. Another had clearly used my imported Persian rug as a bathroom. The sheer level of malicious destruction was absolutely infuriating, but the ruined furniture was not what made my blood run completely cold. The heavy oak front door suddenly swung open on the video feed. Jamal and Kiara walked into the living room carrying greasy takeout bags from a cheap fast food restaurant. Kiara kicked her shoes off, completely ignoring the massive, disgusting mess her dogs had just made in my beautiful home. She aggressively threw her designer purse onto the kitchen island and started complaining loudly. "This is completely ruined!" Kiara whined, her voice echoing sharply through the high-quality camera microphone. "I cannot believe that selfish witch actually canceled the flights. What am I supposed to do now?" Jamal sighed heavily, setting the food down and aggressively rubbing his temples. He looked exhausted, defeated, and deeply stressed. "Keep your voice down, Kiara," he snapped irritably. "I am trying to think. I am trying to figure out how to fix this massive disaster." "Fix it!" Kiara yelled, stepping closer to her father. "How are you going to fix this?" "Because of her, I cannot meet Mom in Italy." "You promised me. Mom is already waiting in Venice right now. She flew out there yesterday. You promised we were going to meet her." I froze completely. My fingers tightly gripped the wrought iron railing of my Parisian balcony. Mom. She was talking about Jamal's ex-wife. The woman he swore he had absolutely zero contact with for the past 7 years. Jamal frantically shushed his daughter quickly, glancing around the destroyed living room as if the walls themselves were actively listening to his dark secrets. "I know what I promised," Jamal hissed back, his voice thick with desperate panic. "But Charmaine canceled the entire itinerary. The hotel is gone. The flights are gone. I was supposed to wire your mother the $100,000 from our joint savings account the absolute second we landed in Venice. It was supposed to look like an international business investment. If I move that massive amount of money right now while Charmaine is angry and watching the accounts, she will get an immediate fraud alert." I stopped breathing. The bustling sounds of the beautiful Parisian streets far below my balcony completely faded into absolute deafening silence. The $100,000. The massive high-yield joint savings account I had generously funded with my own company profits to buy a vacation home for our future. Jamal was never planning to celebrate our 5-year wedding anniversary. The romantic luxury trip to Italy, the private gondolas, the expensive dinners. It was all an elaborate, sickeningly detailed cover story. He was planning to use my hard-earned money, my credit cards, and my luxury itinerary to smuggle a massive fortune directly to his ex-wife so she could start a new business overseas. Kiara intentionally tearing up my boarding pass at the airport was not a spontaneous temper tantrum from a spoiled brat. It was a highly calculated, malicious setup. They needed a believable excuse to leave me behind in America while they flew to Europe on my dime to fund his ex-wife's new life. I stared deeply at my glowing phone screen, watching the man I had loyally loved and fiercely protected pace nervously back and forth across my ruined living room. He was a complete fraud, a financial predator hiding behind a charming smile and a tailored suit. My anger, which had been burning hot and bright all morning, suddenly crystallized into a terrifying absolute calmness. This was no longer just petty family drama. This was no longer about a ruined anniversary trip or a disrespectful stepdaughter. This was a massive, highly orchestrated financial betrayal. Jamal was actively trying to rob me blind. I did not cry. I did not scream. I slowly closed the security application and opened my business contacts. I checked the time difference between Paris and the east coast of the United States. It was the middle of the night back home, but I knew my elite wealth manager never slept when a crisis hit. Jamal thought he was a strategic genius. He thought he had successfully manipulated the system and found a brilliant loophole to steal my money. But he had fundamentally forgotten who actually built the system. I turned my back to the beautiful Eiffel Tower, walked confidently right back into my luxury suite, and prepared to drop an absolute financial guillotine on his entire pathetic life. I sat down at the heavy mahogany desk in the corner of my Parisian hotel suite and flipped open my laptop. The bright screen illuminated the opulent room, casting a cold blue light over my face. It was 3 in the morning back in Atlanta, but I did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. I reached for my phone and dialed the direct emergency line for Lawrence, my senior wealth manager and corporate attorney. Lawrence and I had built my company together from the ground up. He knew every single intimate detail of my financial architecture. Jamal always loved to brag to his friends and family about our massive joint savings account. He loved pulling out his smartphone at family barbecues, opening the banking application, and casually showing off the six-figure balance. He thought that money belonged to him just as much as it belonged to me. He thought he could simply initiate a wire transfer from his phone the moment he landed in Italy and send my hard-earned money directly to the woman who abandoned his daughter. But Jamal was a regional bank manager who only understood retail banking. He handed out basic car loans and opened checking accounts for everyday consumers. He possessed absolutely no understanding of high-level corporate wealth management. That joint account was never a traditional savings account. It was a corporate sweep account directly tied to my primary business limited liability company. Jamal was merely listed as an authorized viewer and a supplementary cardholder. He had the illusion of access, but he never possessed the actual legal authority to initiate an international wire transfer of that magnitude without my direct dual authentication approval. Lawrence answered the phone on the second ring, his voice crisp and completely alert despite the late hour. "Good morning, Charmaine," he said smoothly. "I assume this is not a social call." "Far from it, Lawrence," I replied, my voice completely steady and void of any emotion. "I need you to execute the contingency protocols we discussed during our last quarterly review. I need the joint sweep account completely drained and locked immediately. Transfer every single penny of the liquid assets directly into the blind trust." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line as Lawrence rapidly pulled up my corporate files. "Consider it done," he confirmed, the sound of his keyboard clacking rapidly in the background. "The sweep account is now at a zero balance. The funds are safely secured behind the LLC trust wall. Jamal has absolutely zero access to them. Shall I proceed with the credit accounts as well?" "Yes," I instructed coldly. "Freeze his supplementary Black American Express card. Freeze the corporate visa. Block his access to the company expense account. I want his financial footprint reduced to absolute zero within the next 60 seconds. Leave him with nothing but his own personal low-limit credit card." It was a beautifully ruthless process. With just a few swift keystrokes, the lavish, wealthy lifestyle Jamal had comfortably enjoyed for the past 5 years was instantly terminated. He had grown so incredibly accustomed to swiping my cards for his expensive tailored suits, his lavish business lunches, and his generous gifts to his toxic family members. He truly believed he was a self-made king, completely forgetting that he was living entirely on my kingdom's royal decree. But I was not finished yet. I had to address the luxury vehicles. Jamal loved to drive the brand-new, fully loaded Range Rover. He loved pulling up to Auntie Valerie's house and acting like he was the grand patriarch of the family. "Lawrence, what is the current status of the Range Rover?" I asked, leaning back in my plush chair. "The Range Rover is registered exclusively under your corporate fleet management policy," Lawrence replied efficiently. "It is company property. Jamal is listed as an authorized driver for insurance purposes, but he holds no ownership rights whatsoever." "Revoke his driving authorization immediately," I commanded. "Contact the fleet management security company. I want the vehicle remotely disabled. Do not let him start the engine. Have a private recovery team dispatched to the house to quietly repossess the car and move it to our secure corporate storage facility." "Understood," Lawrence said. "The digital kill switch has been activated. The recovery team is being dispatched now." "Is there anything else, Charmaine?" "Draft the divorce papers." I said the words slipping from my mouth with shocking ease. "I want the absolute maximum penalty clauses enforced from our prenuptial agreement." He violated the fidelity and financial disclosure clauses by attempting to secretly funnel marital assets to his former spouse. "Prepare the residential eviction notice for him and Kiara. I want them both out of my house by the end of the weekend." "I will have the documents finalized and ready for your signature by morning," Lawrence promised. "Enjoy, Paris Charmaine. You have earned it." I ended the call and closed my laptop. A deep, profound sense of peace washed over my entire body. I walked back out onto the balcony and watched the morning traffic begin to weave around the base of the Eiffel Tower. I had just dismantled my husband's entire fake reality in less than 10 minutes. Back in Atlanta, the sun was just beginning to rise and Jamal was about to step directly onto a massive financial landmine. I did not have to wait very long for the glorious fallout to begin. A few hours later, while I was enjoying a decadent multi-course French breakfast in the hotel dining room, my phone buzzed with an incoming text message. It was an automated security alert from my smart home system. The front door of my house had just opened. I set down my silver fork, wiped my mouth with a crisp linen napkin, and casually opened the camera application on my phone. The live video feed showed Jamal aggressively storming into the living room. He was fully dressed in his expensive golf attire. He looked absolutely furious, his face twisted in a dark scowl. He was holding his smartphone out in front of him, furiously stabbing at the screen with his index finger. Kiara walked in slowly behind him wearing her oversized designer pajamas and carrying a completely empty coffee cup. "What is wrong now?" she whined loudly, stepping carelessly over the torn pieces of velvet couch her dogs had destroyed the night before. "Why did we have to come back inside so fast?" "The car will not start," Jamal yelled, his voice cracking with intense frustration. "The Range Rover is completely dead. The digital dashboard is locked out and it keeps flashing a corporate security error code. I just called the dealership and they told me the vehicle has been remotely immobilized by the registered owner." Kiara rolled her eyes dramatically and flopped down onto the remaining intact section of the sofa. "Well, just order a premium Uber," then she complained. "You promised you were taking me to the luxury mall today to buy me those new designer boots to make up for missing Italy. I need content for my social media page." Jamal turned on his daughter, his eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of rage and sudden dawning panic. "I cannot buy you designer boots, Kiara. I cannot buy anything right now." He began pacing frantically back and forth across the ruined living room, pulling his hair in heavy distress. "I just tried to buy a coffee at the drive-thru and my card was declined. The black card is blocked. The corporate visa is blocked. I tried to log into the banking application to check the joint savings account and my login credentials have been completely revoked." Kiara sat straight up, her spoiled, apathetic demeanor instantly vanishing. "What do you mean, revoked?" she demanded sharply. "Call her. Call Charmaine right now and tell her to turn the money back on. You told me you had this completely under control. You told Mom the money would be wired by tomorrow morning." "I cannot call her," Jamal shouted, his voice echoing loudly off the high ceilings. "She is not answering her phone. She completely ghosted us. Do you understand what is happening right now? She knows. Somehow she figured it out. She locked the accounts." Watching a manipulative, arrogant man slowly realize that he has been completely outsmarted is an incredibly satisfying experience. Jamal had spent the last 5 years treating me like an endless ATM machine, assuming I was too deeply in love with him to ever notice his constant financial drain. He relied heavily on my desire for a peaceful, happy family to blind me to his blatant disrespect. But he severely underestimated my intelligence. You do not build a multi-million-dollar software company by being gullible. I saw the warning signs early on in our marriage, which was exactly why I quietly structured all of my major assets under an ironclad LLC before I ever allowed him to move into my home. I gave him enough rope to hang himself, and he had finally reached the end of the line. My phone suddenly began vibrating frantically against the white tablecloth. It was Jamal calling. Then he called again and again. He was desperately trying to reach me, likely to spin some elaborate, tearful lie about bank errors and misunderstandings. I picked up my phone, took a slow, satisfying sip of my freshly squeezed orange juice, and blocked his phone number entirely. I also blocked Kiara. I blocked Auntie Valerie, Uncle Darnell, and every single toxic family member who had ever smiled in my face while quietly celebrating my disrespect. I was absolutely done playing the role of the submissive, understanding wife. I was done financing the lifestyle of a man who plotted to steal my money to fund the woman he used to sleep with. I stood up from the table, grabbed my designer purse, and walked out into the beautiful Parisian morning. The air felt incredibly fresh and vibrant. I had a full day of luxury shopping ahead of me, and I needed to find the perfect, breathtaking outfit to wear to my final showdown. Jamal had previously texted me demanding that I return home by Sunday to cook for Auntie Valerie's family barbecue and apologize to Kiara. I intended to grant him exactly half of his wish. I was definitely going to attend that Sunday barbecue, but I would not be cooking, and I certainly would not be apologizing. I was going to deliver a performance that his family would remember for the rest of their natural lives. I walked into a breathtaking luxury boutique on Avenue Montaigne. The scent of expensive leather and fresh lilies filled the air, completely washing away the lingering toxicity of my morning. A sharply dressed sales associate greeted me with a warm smile and immediately escorted me to a private VIP fitting room in the back. They offered me a crystal glass of sparkling water and a plate of delicate macarons, while I began browsing their exclusive collections. I was not just shopping for clothes, I was carefully selecting my armor. I needed an outfit that screamed absolute power, unbothered wealth, and untouchable grace. I eventually settled on a perfectly tailored emerald green silk suit. It was sharp, sophisticated, and cost more than Jamal made in 3 entire months at his retail bank. I handed the associate my heavy corporate card, feeling a deep wave of satisfaction as the transaction was instantly approved. While I was waiting for the suit to be carefully pressed and packaged, my phone buzzed with an incoming encrypted email from Lawrence. He had attached the final legally binding documents confirming our absolute financial separation. Because I am a deeply meticulous businesswoman, I never leave anything to chance. I opened the files on my glowing screen and reviewed the masterstroke we had just executed. Jamal always thought he was a financial genius because he worked at a bank. But retail banking is child's play compared to high-level corporate wealth structuring. The massive joint savings account Jamal thought he possessed was nothing more than a brilliant digital decoy. It was a sweep account. In corporate finance, a sweep account automatically transfers funds into a secure, higher-yield investment vehicle at the close of every business day. The money Jamal gleefully looked at on his banking application was never actually sitting in that specific account. It was essentially a digital mirror, reflecting funds held securely within my primary business trust. When I gave Lawrence the order from my hotel room earlier that morning, we simply shattered the mirror. The funds were instantly rerouted into an irrevocable private trust, entirely protected under my limited liability company. Jamal could open his banking application 1,000 times, and he would only ever see a flat, unforgiving zero. I had also authorized Lawrence to permanently sever every single supplementary credit card attached to my name. I cut off his access to the corporate expense accounts, the luxury vehicle fleet, and the premium health insurance plan I generously provided for him and his daughter. The financial freeze was absolute, airtight, and completely irreversible. Back in Atlanta, Jamal was rapidly spiraling into a deep state of denial. Because his smartphone was still temporarily connected to our shared family cellular plan, I could easily see his data usage and location history through my administrative dashboard. I watched his digital footprint with intense fascination as the evening approached. Despite the humiliating morning where his car was remotely immobilized and his card was brutally declined at a cheap fast food drive-thru, Jamal simply refused to accept his new reality. His massive ego simply could not process the fact that I had completely outmaneuvered him. He convinced himself that I was just throwing a temporary emotional tantrum. He truly believed that the financial lockout was just a petty 24-hour security hold I had initiated out of spite. He honestly thought that by dinner time I would miraculously cool down, answer his desperate text messages, and unlock his lavish lifestyle. But as the afternoon dragged on into the early evening, the heavy silence from Paris began to terrify him. His ex-wife was likely calling him relentlessly from Italy, aggressively demanding the $100,000 he promised to wire her. Kiara was likely whining endlessly about being trapped in a house with torn furniture and no luxury car. Jamal felt his false kingdom crumbling rapidly around him. He desperately needed an escape. He needed an audience to stroke his fragile ego and validate his massive delusion. So he picked up his phone and called Uncle Darnell. Uncle Darnell is Auntie Valerie's husband. He is a loud, incredibly arrogant man who loves smoking cheap cigars, giving terrible unsolicited advice, and spending other people's money. He and Jamal always shared a deeply toxic bond. They constantly fed off each other's misogynistic views, complaining about how modern women needed to be aggressively controlled and kept in their proper place. Jamal invited Uncle Darnell out to dinner at one of the most exclusive high-end steakhouses in downtown Atlanta. It was the kind of establishment with dark mahogany walls, dim ambient lighting, and waiters wearing crisp white tuxedo jackets. Jamal wanted to project an image of absolute strength and unbothered wealth. He wanted to prove to his uncle that he was still the undisputed king of his household. Because his Range Rover had been repossessed by my corporate security team, earlier that day Jamal was forced to order a premium black car service to get to the restaurant. I saw the $20 charge hit his personal low-limit debit card. It was one of the very few transactions he could still successfully complete. When Jamal arrived at the steakhouse, Uncle Darnell was already seated in a plush leather booth, sipping a remarkably expensive glass of aged bourbon. Jamal slid into the booth opposite him, aggressively straightening his tailored suit jacket, trying desperately to look completely unbothered. I can only imagine the ridiculous lies Jamal spun across that table. He likely painted me as a hysterical, deeply unreasonable woman who ruined their beautiful anniversary trip over a minor disagreement. He probably told Darnell that he decided to come home early, just to be the bigger person and keep the peace in the family. Darnell, always eager to tear down a successful woman, surely fueled the fire. I can practically hear his gravelly voice echoing in that restaurant. "You have to put your foot down," Jamal Darnell would say, pointing his thick finger across the table. "You cannot let that woman embarrass you at the airport and then fly off to Europe by herself. She is acting way out of line. You need to show her exactly who the man of the house is when she gets back. Cut off her spending money, teach her a lesson." The sheer blinding irony of Uncle Darnell advising Jamal to cut off my spending money is almost too hilarious to comprehend. Driven by his uncle's toxic validation and his own desperate need to maintain his wealthy facade, Jamal decided to go all out for dinner. He ordered the massive, dry-aged tomahawk ribeye steak. He ordered the truffle macaroni and cheese, the grilled asparagus, and 2 more rounds of their most expensive top-shelf bourbon. They laughed. They ate like kings. And they spent 2 solid hours loudly complaining about how ungrateful and disrespectful women are today. Jamal felt completely invincible again. He was the big-shot bank manager treating his uncle to a lavish, expensive dinner. Then the inevitable moment of absolute truth arrived. The waiter balancing a small silver tray approached their leather booth and politely placed the black leather checkbook right in the center of the table. The total bill for their extravagant meal was well over $400. Jamal casually reached into his designer wallet. He completely bypassed his personal low-limit debit card. Instead, he pulled out the heavy, solid metal supplementary black American Express card that had my corporate logo discreetly engraved on the back. He tossed it onto the small silver tray with an arrogant, practiced flick of his wrist. He did not even bother to look at the total amount. He just smiled smugly at Uncle Darnell, silently proving that he was still a man of immense financial means. "Keep the change, my man," Jamal told the waiter confidently. The waiter offered a polite, practiced bow of his head and walked away toward the point-of-sale terminal near the heavy oak bar. Jamal leaned back against the plush leather seat, highly satisfied with his grand performance. Less than 3 minutes later, the waiter returned. His crisp white tuxedo jacket was perfectly straight, but his facial expression had shifted from warm hospitality to tight, uncomfortable professionalism. He stepped up to the edge of the booth and gently placed the black leather checkbook back onto the table directly in front of Jamal. The heavy metal credit card was resting on top of the printed receipt. "I am so incredibly sorry, sir," the waiter said quietly, intentionally, keeping his voice low to avoid drawing the attention of the surrounding wealthy diners. "But this card has been heavily declined. The terminal is explicitly instructing us to confiscate the card, but I will simply ask for another form of payment." The smug, arrogant smile completely vanished from Jamal's face. The color aggressively drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking pale and deeply sick. Uncle Darnell stopped chewing on his toothpick and stared sharply across the table. Declined. Jamal stammered, his voice suddenly cracking. That is completely impossible. There is no limit on that account. You must have run it wrong. Run it again. I have already attempted to process the transaction 3 separate times, sir. The waiter replied firmly, losing a fraction of his polite patience. The account has been frozen by the primary cardholder. Do you perhaps have another form of payment we can use tonight? Panic, cold, and absolute finally seized Jamal's entire body. The grand illusion was officially dead. He was sitting in a $400 dinner booth, and his wife had just turned his money off completely. He frantically reached back into his wallet with trembling fingers. He pulled out the corporate Visa card and practically shoved it into the waiter's hand. Try this one, he demanded, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. The waiter sighed, silently walked back to the bar, and returned exactly 60 seconds later. He placed the Visa card right next to the American Express. Declined as well, sir. The exact same error code. Uncle Darnell shifted his heavy weight in the booth, his eyes narrowing with deep suspicion and rising anger. What is going on here? Jamal Darnell demanded harshly. I thought you said you had everything completely under control. Why are all your cards bouncing at a place like this? You are making us look like a couple of broke fools. Jamal was openly sweating now. He pulled out his personal bank debit card, the one linked to his meager retail bank salary. He handed it to the waiter, silently praying to whatever higher power would listen that he had enough funds left to cover the massive steak dinner he had just proudly devoured. The waiter walked away one final time. When he returned, he did not even bother to place the book on the table. He simply handed the cheap plastic debit card straight back to Jamal. Insufficient funds, sir, the waiter announced, his voice carrying just enough volume for the neighboring table to clearly hear. If you cannot provide a valid form of payment immediately, I will be forced to involve our restaurant management. Jamal sat entirely frozen in the dimly lit booth. He had no money, he had no power, he had absolutely nothing left to hide behind. He was completely exposed as a fraud right in front of the one family member whose respect he desperately craved. Uncle Darnell let out a loud, disgusted scoff that echoed sharply over the smooth jazz playing in the background. He aggressively threw his linen napkin onto the table, reached into his own pocket, and pulled out his worn leather wallet. He practically threw 5 $100 bills onto the silver tray. Do not ever invite me to dinner again if you cannot pay the damn bill, Jamal Darnell hissed viciously, his face contorted in pure, unfiltered disgust. You sit here acting like a wealthy king, but your wife owns your entire life. You are an absolute joke. Uncle Darnell stood up, adjusted his jacket, and stormed straight out of the elegant restaurant, leaving Jamal sitting completely alone at the table. The devastating reality of his situation had finally crashed down upon him. He was trapped in Atlanta. His daughter's dogs were destroying a house he was about to be evicted from. His angry ex-wife was waiting for money in Italy that would never arrive, and his entire toxic family was about to find out that the golden boy was completely undeniably broke. Sitting in my luxurious hotel suite in Paris, wearing my beautiful new silk pajamas, I looked out at the glittering lights of the Eiffel Tower and smiled. The chess game was officially over. Now it was time for the execution. But before I could fully enjoy my Parisian victory lap, I still had one very pressing domestic issue to resolve back in America. My custom velvet furniture had already taken a massive destructive hit, and I was absolutely not going to let 3 hyperactive, completely untrained French bulldogs turn the rest of my pristine estate into a giant, incredibly expensive toilet. Jamal and Kiara had purposefully abandoned those chaotic animals inside my meticulously decorated living room, genuinely expecting me to panic, fly back across the Atlantic Ocean, and clean up their disgusting mess like a submissive maid. They clearly forgot that I do not clean up messes, I completely eliminate them. I opened my laptop and quickly searched the internet for the most extravagantly expensive high-end pet boarding facility in the entire metropolitan Atlanta area. I did not want a standard dog kennel with chain-link fences and concrete floors. I wanted a place that charged an utterly ridiculous amount of money. Within 3 minutes, I found exactly what I was looking for. It was an elite facility called Paws and Pearls Luxury Pet Resort. This place was absolutely absurd in the best possible way. The website boasted about their private temperature-controlled canine suites, featuring orthopedic memory foam beds, flat-screen televisions playing calming nature sounds, and daily blueberry facial scrubs. They offered organic Wagyu beef meals prepared by a private pet chef, specialized canine massage therapy, and one-on-one behavioral training sessions. The base rate for boarding 3 dogs of their specific breed was exactly $800 a single night. With the added VIP concierge home extraction service, the total bill was going to be absolutely astronomical. I smiled a cold, highly satisfied smile and dialed their direct reservation line. I spoke with a delightful, highly professional concierge named Sebastian. I explained that I was currently out of the country on urgent corporate business and needed my 3 beloved family dogs picked up from my private residence immediately. I gave him the temporary single-use access code to my smart front door lock. Sebastian assured me that his premium transportation team would be at my estate within the hour. I kept my phone propped up against the hotel desk and watched the entire extraction process unfold live on my high-definition security cameras. Jamal and Kiara were still out of the house, likely still arguing with the dealership about the remotely immobilized Range Rover or pacing nervously around Uncle Darnell's neighborhood. A sleek, black Mercedes luxury van with the Paws and Pearls logo discreetly printed on the side pulled smoothly into my long driveway. 2 professionally dressed handlers stepped out, entered my home using the digital code, and expertly wrangled the 3 chaotic dogs. They even managed to place matching designer safety harnesses on them before safely loading them into the climate-controlled luxury van. My house was finally secure, perfectly quiet, and completely dog-free. When Sebastian called me back 30 minutes later to confirm the dogs were safely checked into their luxury suites and currently enjoying their welcome treats, he politely asked for a major credit card to keep on file for the incidental charges and the heavy nightly boarding rate. This was the exact moment I executed my absolute favorite, most incredibly petty twist of the entire day. I did not give Sebastian my corporate Black American Express card. I did not give him the numbers to any of the business accounts. Instead, I reached into my secure digital password vault and pulled out the 16-digit number for Jamal's heavily guarded, highly secret emergency credit card. Jamal thought he was so incredibly slick. He opened this specific personal credit card 3 years ago with a maximum credit limit of exactly $5,000. He intentionally had the physical card and all the paper statements shipped directly to his bank branch office instead of our home address. He used it to quietly buy expensive golf clubs, treat his toxic friends to expensive rounds of drinks, and essentially fund a hidden bachelor lifestyle without me ever knowing. But when you are married to a senior software engineer who designed the network security architecture for major financial institutions, hiding a basic retail credit card is like trying to hide an elephant behind a single blade of grass. I had known about the secret account since the exact day he opened it. I had complete digital access to the ledger, but I never said a single word about it to him. I simply kept the account numbers safely stored away for a rainy day. Well, it was officially pouring, and Jamal was about to get soaked. I casually read the secret card numbers to Sebastian over the phone. I authorized a premium VIP spa package for the dogs and instructed the resort to place an immediate non-refundable deposit hold of $3,200 on the account to cover the first 4 nights. The charge went through instantly. Jamal's secret financial safety net, his absolute last line of monetary defense, was now completely tied up in organic dog treats and canine massage therapy. A few hours passed. I decided to leave my hotel suite and take a leisurely, beautiful stroll down the River Seine, enjoying the crisp European afternoon air. I eventually stopped at a charming little sidewalk cafe, took a seat facing the spectacular city view, and ordered a fresh, buttery croissant and a rich cappuccino. I was feeling incredibly at peace. Just as the French waiter politely placed the beautiful porcelain cup on my small table, my phone practically exploded with a violent, uninterrupted series of incoming text messages. Kiara and Jamal had finally returned to the empty house. Kiara sent a frantic, heavily misspelled all-caps text message directly to my phone. "Where are my dogs? The house is completely empty. Did you call animal control on my precious fur babies? You are a complete monster. Tell me where they are right now. Before I could even read the rest of her hysterical, deeply entitled messages, my screen flashed again. I was suddenly added to a brand new, highly active family group chat. The creator of the chat, unsurprisingly, was Auntie Valerie. She dramatically titled the group Family Emergency. She had added me, Jamal, Kiara, Uncle Darnell, and several other notoriously nosy relatives who had absolutely no business being involved in my marriage or my personal finances. Auntie Valerie immediately sent a massive, highly aggressive block of text to the entire group. Charmaine, you have officially crossed the line this time. Kicking my brother out of his own bank accounts is one thing, but stealing a young girl's innocent fur babies is pure, unfiltered wickedness. Kiara is having a severe crying panic attack on the living room floor right now. You better tell us exactly where those dogs are this second, before I personally call the Atlanta Police Department and report you for grand theft animal. You are acting like a crazy woman. The rest of the toxic family immediately chimed in, eager to jump on the bandwagon of tearing me down. Uncle Darnell sent a series of angry red face emojis. A cousin I had not spoken to in 3 years demanded that I return home and fix my broken marriage. Jamal sent a separate, incredibly pathetic private message begging me to just tell them where the dogs were so Kiara would stop screaming at him and making his head hurt. The sheer blinding entitlement of these people was truly breathtaking. They broke into my private property. They intentionally left their untrained animals loose to destroy my expensive custom furniture. They actively plotted to steal $100,000 of my hard-earned money to fund a woman who abandoned her own child. And yet, through some massive level of shared delusion, they genuinely believed I was the villain of the story for simply hiring a professional service to remove the destructive dogs from my home. I took a slow, deep breath of the sweet Parisian air. I picked up my phone and opened the camera application. I held the phone up high, making absolutely sure to capture the magnificent towering iron structure of the Eiffel Tower, perfectly framed in the bright blue sky behind me. I held my half-eaten, perfectly flaky butter croissant up in the foreground. I smiled the brightest, most genuinely happy, completely unbothered smile of my entire life, and I snapped the picture. I casually opened the chaotic, screaming family group chat. I attached the beautiful vacation photo. Below it, I typed a very short, perfectly polite message. The dogs are doing wonderfully. They are currently enjoying a 5-star luxury spa day at the exclusive Paws and Pearls Pet Resort in Midtown. They are perfectly safe, heavily pampered, and probably eating significantly better than all of you right now. Do not worry about the massive boarding bill. Jamal generously provided his private emergency credit card to completely cover all of their luxury expenses. Enjoy the rest of your week. I hit send. I watched the little delivered notification pop up under the picture. Almost immediately, the chat went absolutely berserk. Several people in the group began typing furious, rapid-fire responses all at once. Auntie Valerie's name popped up with the typing indicator bubble. Kiara's name popped up. Jamal's name popped up. Likely panicking because I just publicly exposed the secret emergency credit card he had been hiding from his own family. But I did not wait to read a single one of their angry, desperate replies. I simply swiped left on the screen, muted the entire group chat, indefinitely turned my phone completely off and placed it face down on the small cafe table. I picked up my warm cappuccino, took a slow, luxurious sip, and listened to the beautiful, vibrant sounds of the French city moving around me. Leaving toxic, manipulative people on red while you enjoy the fruits of your own hard labor is truly the ultimate form of self-care. Jamal was now entirely trapped in a cage of his own making. He had absolutely zero access to my massive wealth. His secret backup funds were completely maxed out on exorbitant dog boarding fees. His entire family was now fully aware of the escalating chaos, and his entitled daughter was likely throwing the biggest, most explosive tantrum of her entire spoiled life. The stage was now perfectly set for my grand, highly anticipated return to Atlanta. The Sunday barbecue was going to be an absolute masterpiece of justice. Before I could properly deliver that masterpiece of justice, I needed to make sure the legal stage was perfectly set. Jamal had spent the entire duration of our marriage parading around Atlanta, loudly claiming ownership of an empire he did not build. The sprawling four-bedroom colonial estate we lived in was the crown jewel of his massive deception. When we first started dating, I was already a highly successful software developer running my own lucrative firm. I purchased that magnificent property 2 full years before he ever bought me an engagement ring. But I did not buy it in my own name. I am a meticulous businesswoman who understands the absolute necessity of asset protection. I purchased the estate entirely in cash through my corporate entity, a limited liability company I established specifically for real estate investments. When Jamal eventually moved in after our wedding, his incredibly fragile masculinity simply could not handle the undeniable truth that he was living in his wife's house. He was a regional bank manager who desperately wanted to be seen as the ultimate provider and patriarch. So he started lying. He told Auntie Valerie, Uncle Darnell, and the rest of his highly judgmental family that he had purchased the luxury home to take care of me. He bragged about the mortgage rates he supposedly negotiated. He boasted about the landscaping costs he supposedly paid. I let him have his ridiculous little illusion because I genuinely loved him and wanted to keep the peace. I never once corrected his family when they praised him for being such an excellent provider. That silence was officially over. Jamal was about to learn the devastating difference between pretending to own a home and actually holding the corporate deed. I sat at the antique writing desk in my Parisian hotel suite and initiated a secure video call with my private family law attorney, Gregory. Gregory is universally known throughout the Atlanta legal community as an absolute shark. He specializes in high net worth divorces and possesses absolutely no mercy for financial predators. Good afternoon, Charmaine, Gregory said, his sharp eyes focused through the screen. Lawrence briefed me on the sweep account lockdown earlier today. I assume we are moving to the final phase. We are moving to total eradication, Gregory Weiss replied calmly. I want the divorce petition filed with the court the absolute second they open on Monday morning. I want you to execute the maximum penalty clauses outlined in our prenuptial agreement. Jamal actively attempted to secretly wire $100,000 of marital funds to his former spouse. We have that completely documented on high-definition audio and video from the living room security cameras. He violated the financial fidelity clause. I want him to leave this marriage with absolutely nothing. Gregory smiled a thin, highly dangerous smile. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad, Charmaine. He waived his right to any alimony or spousal support in the event of financial infidelity. He will walk away completely empty-handed. What do you want to do about the primary residence? Evict him, I instructed, without a single ounce of hesitation. Today. Gregory nodded, already typing rapidly on his end. Since the property is legally owned by your limited liability company, and his name is nowhere on the corporate documents, he is technically classified as a month-to-month tenant. Because you are the sole managing member of the LLC, we can issue an immediate commercial notice to quit the premises. I will have the official eviction documents drafted by a process server. Do you want the local sheriff deputies present to physically remove him? Not yet, I said, a cold smile forming on my lips. Have the documents completely finalized and legally binding. But hold the delivery. I am flying back to Atlanta this weekend. I am going to personally hand him the eviction notice in front of his entire family. I ended the call with Gregory feeling incredibly powerful. The legal trap was completely set. Every single exit door was securely locked. Jamal was currently standing on a financial trapdoor, completely unaware that I was already holding the lever. To fully understand the sheer magnitude of his delusion, you have to look at the text message he sent me later that evening. Despite having his luxury car remotely disabled, his corporate credit cards frozen, and his secret funds drained by a luxury pet resort, Jamal still believed he was in total control of the narrative. He genuinely thought my financial freeze was just a temporary temper tantrum. He thought he could bully me back into submission by applying intense family pressure. My phone screen lit up with his message. It was a masterpiece of toxic arrogance and breathtaking entitlement. Valerie is hosting a Sunday barbecue at our house this weekend, Jamal wrote. The entire family is coming over. You better be back from your little European tantrum by then. The house is a mess, and you need to go grocery shopping to prepare the food. You also need to publicly apologize to Kiara for acting so crazy and taking her dogs away. If you do not show up and act like a respectful wife, we are done. I read the text message twice, genuinely marveling at the absolute audacity of the man. He was threatening to end a marriage that I had already legally dismantled. He was demanding that I cook for the exact same people who constantly disrespected me in my own home. He was calling my property our house. I did not write a long emotional paragraph explaining my feelings. I did not argue with him about the destroyed furniture or the secret wire transfer to his ex-wife. I simply typed a single, perfectly polite sentence. I will be there. I am bringing a surprise. I hit send, placed my phone in my designer purse, and spent my final evening in Paris enjoying a spectacular private dinner overlooking the Seine River. 2 days later, the morning sun was shining brightly over Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport as my Delta One direct flight touched down on the tarmac. I stepped off the plane feeling completely refreshed, fiercely rejuvenated, and entirely untouchable. I was wearing the breathtaking emerald green silk suit I had purchased on Avenue Montaigne. My hair was flawlessly styled. My makeup was absolutely perfect. I looked like a woman who owned the entire world primarily because I legally owned everything my husband desperately relied on to survive. My private chauffeur met me at the baggage claim, collected my designer luggage, and drove me straight to my affluent suburban neighborhood. As the sleek black luxury sedan turned onto my pristine tree-lined street, I felt a deep surge of pure adrenaline. This was my kingdom. I built it from the ground up, with my own sweat-brilliant code and relentless ambition. It was time to aggressively reclaim my throne. The chauffeur pulled into my expansive driveway and parked directly behind Jamal's cheap, heavily dented rental car. His beloved corporate Range Rover was long gone, safely locked away in my company storage facility. I thanked the driver, grabbed my luxury handbag, and walked gracefully up the stone pathway to my heavy oak front door. I did not knock. I simply unlocked the door and stepped into the grand foyer of my own estate. The immediate smell of stale fast food and cheap domestic beer hit my nose. The house was distressingly quiet, without the 3 chaotic French bulldogs running around, but the visual mess they left behind was still highly evident. Jamal and Kiara had clearly made absolutely zero effort to clean up the shredded velvet couch or the ruined antique coffee table. I walked into the massive custom-designed chef's kitchen. Jamal was sitting at the marble island wearing a pair of wrinkled gray sweatpants and a stained white undershirt. He looked incredibly exhausted, his eyes bloodshot and his face carrying a heavy, unshaven shadow. Kiara was lounging aggressively on the bar stool next to him, staring blankly at her smartphone screen. When they heard my designer heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor, they both snapped their heads up in complete surprise. They clearly expected me to walk through that door looking broken, apologetic, and heavily burdened by guilt. Instead, I stood before them radiating absolute power and unbothered luxury. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," Kiara sneered, her voice dripping with extreme entitlement. She completely ignored my beautiful Parisian outfit. She just rolled her eyes and gestured aggressively toward my custom stainless steel refrigerator. "There is absolutely no food in this house. The fridge is completely empty. You need to go grocery shopping right now before Auntie Valerie and everyone else gets here for the barbecue. I am starving." Jamal stood up from his bar stool, trying desperately to puff out his chest and project an aura of dominant authority. His attempt failed miserably. He just looked like a tired, broke man wearing dirty sweatpants in a luxury kitchen he did not own. Charmaine, Jamal said, using his sternest, most patronizing voice. "I am glad you finally came to your senses and came home. Now, before we address your completely unacceptable behavior at the airport, we need to deal with the most important issue. Kiara is deeply traumatized. You need to tell us exactly where you sent her dogs." I smiled gently, casually, resting my expensive leather handbag on the pristine marble countertop. I unclasped the gold hardware, reached inside, and pulled out a thick, glossy, beautifully printed promotional brochure. I slid it across the marble island directly toward Kiara. "Your dogs are absolutely fine, sweetie," I said, my voice dripping with sweet, lethal kindness. "They are currently enjoying a 5-star VIP luxury package at the Paws and Pearls Pet Resort in Midtown." Kiara snatched the glossy brochure off the counter. Her eyes instantly lit up as she flipped through the thick pages, staring at the high-quality photographs of the temperature-controlled canine suites, the organic Wagyu beef meals, and the specialized pet massage therapy rooms. The spoiled, deeply entitled girl inside her completely overpowered her anger toward me. "Oh my God," Kiara gasped, her face breaking into a massive, triumphant grin. "This place looks incredibly expensive. This is exactly the kind of luxury lifestyle content I need for my social media followers. I'm going to go pick them up right now and do a massive photo shoot in their private suites." Jamal completely relaxed, letting out a loud, heavy sigh of relief. He honestly thought he had won. He thought I had simply paid a massive sum of money to appease his bratty daughter and buy my way back into his good graces. "See, Kiara," Jamal said smoothly, puffing his chest out even further. "I told you your stepmother would fix everything. She knows she overreacted." I leaned casually against the counter, crossing my arms over my emerald silk suit. "Well, I would not rush over there just yet, Kiara," I said calmly. "The resort has a very strict corporate policy. They will not release the animals until the entire luxury boarding bill is paid in full." Kiara scoffed loudly, tossing her long hair over her shoulder. "So what? Just give me your metal credit card so I can go pay for it." "I do not need to give you my card," I replied, staring directly into Jamal's eyes. "Your incredibly generous father has already taken care of the entire bill." Jamal frowned deeply in complete confusion. His thick eyebrows pulled together as he stared back at me. "What are you talking about, Charmaine? All of the cards you gave me are completely frozen. The dealership took the Range Rover. I have not paid for anything." At that exact, beautifully orchestrated second, Jamal's smartphone resting on the marble counter let out a loud, sharp digital chime. It was an automated fraud alert text message directly from his private retail bank. Jamal slowly looked down at the glowing screen. I watched the exact moment his brain processed the incoming information. His eyes widened in absolute sheer horror. His jaw dropped completely open. All the blood aggressively rushed out of his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. I had given the pet resort his highly secret, perfectly hidden emergency credit card number. I knew his absolute maximum credit limit was exactly $5,000. The luxury pet resort had just officially processed the finalized boarding bill for 3 large dogs, including the premium transportation fee, the organic meals, and the daily spa treatments. "What is it, Dad?" Kiara asked, completely oblivious to the massive financial bomb that had just detonated in her father's lap. Jamal picked up his phone with visibly trembling hands. He swiped the screen, opening his mobile banking application to confirm the devastating text message. His secret safety net was completely gone. The pet resort had placed a hard, non-refundable charge of $3,250 onto his private account. His available credit was completely obliterated. He was maxed out. He was officially broke. $3,000! Jamal screamed, his voice cracking violently in pure panic. He slammed his hand down onto the marble counter, making Kiara flinch backward in surprise. $3,000 for dog sitting. Are you completely out of your mind, Charmaine? I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply smiled. "It is a luxury resort, Jamal," I replied smoothly. "You always told your family that you only want the absolute best luxury lifestyle for your daughter. I simply made sure she received it. You should be thanking me." "You stole my private card numbers," Jamal yelled, his face turning a deep, furious shade of red. He was breathing heavily, aggressively, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You illegally accessed my personal financial accounts. I am calling the police right now. I am having you arrested for credit card fraud." I let out a soft, genuine laugh that echoed brightly off the high ceiling. "Please, Jamal," I practically begged him. "Please call the Atlanta Police Department. Call them right this second. Tell them exactly how your legally married wife used a credit card bearing your name to safely secure your daughter's destructive animals after you intentionally abandoned them inside my private property. I am sure the police will be absolutely thrilled to hear that story." And while they are here, we can also discuss the security camera footage of you aggressively plotting to steal $100,000 from my corporate business trust to fund your ex-wife's European vacation. The heavy threat of calling the police instantly died in his throat. Jamal froze completely. His furious, shaking finger slowly lowered to his side. The loud, aggressive bravado vanished into thin air, instantly replaced by sheer, unfiltered terror. He knew. He finally realized that I knew absolutely everything. Kiara looked rapidly back and forth between her father and me, complete confusion plastered across her face. What is she talking about, Dad? What European vacation? Mom is waiting for us in Italy right now. When are we sending her the money you promised? Shut up! Kiara Jamal hissed violently through gritted teeth, aggressively silencing his daughter. He turned his panicked eyes back toward me. Desperately trying to switch tactics, he immediately tried to play the role of the victim. Charmaine, baby. Please listen to me, Jamal pleaded, his voice suddenly dropping into a pathetic whining pitch. He took a hesitant step toward me, holding his hands up in a gesture of fake surrender. You are completely misunderstanding the situation. The money was just a short-term business loan. I was going to pay it back. I would never steal from you. We are husband and wife, and we share everything. We do not share a single thing, Jamal. I corrected him coldly, picking up my luxury handbag from the marble counter. I own everything. You simply borrowed it, and your lease has officially expired. Before Jamal could utter another pathetic, desperate lie, the loud sound of car doors slamming echoed from the front driveway. Auntie Valerie's booming, arrogant voice carried clearly through the front windows. The toxic family had officially arrived for their Sunday barbecue. The main audience was finally here, and it was time for the curtain to rise on the greatest performance of my entire life. The heavy oak front door swung open with a loud, obnoxious thud before I could even take another step toward the entryway. Auntie Valerie marched into my grand foyer like a conquering general arriving to inspect her newly claimed territory. She was wearing a violently bright yellow sundress and a massive wide-brimmed straw hat that took up entirely too much space. Right behind her trailed Uncle Darnell, carrying a cheap aluminum tray of store-bought potato salad and a chaotic parade of cousins, nieces, and nephews who immediately began spreading out across my pristine hardwood floors. Auntie Valerie stopped dead in her tracks the absolute second she saw me standing in the kitchen. Her dark eyes slowly scanned my flawless emerald green silk suit, my professionally styled hair, and the incredibly expensive designer handbag resting on the marble island. She had fully expected to walk in and find me crying in a pair of old sweatpants begging for my husband to forgive me. Seeing me radiating absolute unbothered wealth and completely untouchable confidence deeply short-circuited her toxic brain. Her face twisted into a tight, sour expression. Well, look who finally decided to come back down to reality. Auntie Valerie announced loudly, making sure her booming voice echoed through the entire house so every single family member could hear her. She slammed her oversized purse down onto the entryway table, entirely ignoring the fact that she was a guest in my home. I was just telling Darnell in the car that a woman who abandons her husband at the airport and runs off to Europe clearly does not know her proper place in a marriage. It is a crying shame, honestly. A good God-fearing wife is supposed to stand by her man, not throw a selfish temper tantrum because she did not get her way. I simply smiled at her. It was a cold, incredibly hollow smile that did not reach my eyes. Good afternoon to you too, Valerie, I replied smoothly, my voice perfectly level. Welcome to my home. Please make yourselves completely comfortable. The backyard patio is already set up for the afternoon. Uncle Darnell scoffed loudly, brushing past me to set his cheap aluminum tray down on my expensive marble countertop. You better watch that tone, Charmaine, he muttered under his breath, chewing aggressively on an unlit cigar. You have caused enough trouble this week. Jamal is a saint for even letting you walk back through that front door. You need to humble yourself before he decides to put his foot down for good. I watched Uncle Darnell walk away, genuinely marveling at the sheer blinding ignorance of these people. They were standing in a multi-million-dollar estate that I purchased with my own corporate funds, drinking the expensive imported water from my custom refrigerator, and casually telling me that my broke, panicked husband was generously allowing me to exist in my own space. The level of shared delusion was truly a psychological masterpiece. I decided to gracefully exit the kitchen and make my way out to the expansive backyard. The afternoon sun was shining brightly, casting a warm golden glow over the pristine landscaping. My outdoor entertainment space was massive. I had personally designed it to feature a custom-built stone fire pit, premium weatherproof lounge furniture, and a state-of-the-art stainless steel outdoor kitchen. It was the perfect luxurious setting for an absolute bloodbath. Jamal had rushed out the back door the exact second his family arrived, desperately fleeing the kitchen to avoid answering any of the terrifying financial questions I had just laid out before him. He was now standing behind the massive stainless steel grill, aggressively snapping a pair of metal tongs together, like some kind of suburban warrior. He had hastily thrown on a clean polo shirt and was trying with every single ounce of his being to project the image of a wealthy, unbothered patriarch hosting a lavish feast for his loyal subjects. But I could clearly see the thick beads of cold sweat gathering along his hairline. I could see the slight, uncontrollable tremor in his hands every time he reached for a spatula. The automated fraud alert from his bank was still burning a massive hole in his pocket. He knew his secret emergency credit card was completely maxed out. He knew his corporate access was permanently severed. He was standing on a highly fragile glass floor that was rapidly cracking beneath his expensive golf shoes, but his massive male ego simply refused to let him break character in front of Uncle Darnell. Darnell waddled over to the grill, cracking open a cold beer and leaning heavily against the imported stone counter. So Jamal Darnell said loudly, intentionally raising his voice so the cousins sitting on the nearby patio furniture could hear him. "How are you handling this whole situation? Because if my wife ever pulled a stunt like that, canceling my flights and running off to Paris with my hard-earned money, she would find all her belongings packed in garbage bags sitting on the front curb." Jamal swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously in his throat. He glanced quickly toward the sliding glass door, terrified that I might be standing right behind him. When he saw me sitting calmly on a lounge chair across the patio, sipping a glass of sparkling water, he puffed his chest out and completely leaned into the massive lie. "I already handled it, Darnell," Jamal bragged, his voice dripping with fake hollow authority. He forcefully flipped a row of burgers on the grill, sending a cloud of thick gray smoke into the warm afternoon air. "I told Charmaine this morning that the absolute second she got back from her little vacation things were going to fundamentally change around here. I am putting her in her place financially. I am taking away her access to the main checking accounts until she learns how to respect my decisions as the head of this household." Uncle Darnell laughed loudly, slapping Jamal hard on the shoulder. "That is exactly what I like to hear. You have to cut off their spending money. Let her see exactly how hard it is to survive without your banking connections. She thinks she is so smart with her little software job, but she needs to remember who pays the big bills around here. Show her who wears the pants, Jamal." Jamal nodded vigorously, forcing a wide, arrogant smile onto his sweating face. "Exactly. I am teaching her a permanent lesson. She is going to learn that she cannot just manipulate my finances and expect me to roll over. Ladies, you know the type. The man who talks the loudest at the grill usually has the lowest credit score. Keep watching because I'm about to serve him on a silver platter." While Jamal was busy writing fictional checks with his mouth that his actual bank account could never possibly cash, Auntie Valerie was holding court on the opposite side of the patio. She had positioned herself directly in the center of the largest outdoor sofa, completely surrounding herself with the younger, highly impressionable female cousins. She was aggressively waving a plastic cup of fruit punch in the air, delivering an unsolicited, deeply toxic sermon about the absolute necessity of female submission. "It is a generational curse," Auntie Valerie preached loudly, her eyes constantly darting over to my lounge chair to make sure I was actively listening to every single vicious word. "Modern women simply do not want to build a home anymore. They get a little bit of education, they make a little bit of money, and suddenly they think they do not have to listen to their husbands. They become arrogant. They become cold. Look at poor Kiara. That sweet, innocent girl is inside the house right now, having a severe emotional breakdown because her stepmother maliciously kidnapped her beloved dogs just to be spiteful." Several of the cousins murmured in quiet agreement, shooting me dirty, highly judgmental looks from across the patio. Kiara had finally dragged herself out of the house and was sitting slumped in a chair near her father, aggressively glaring at me while furiously typing on her smartphone. She was probably drafting a long, deeply exaggerated post for her tiny social media following about how she was the tragic victim of a wealthy, wicked stepmother. Auntie Valerie was not satisfied with just talking about me. She desperately wanted a direct public confrontation. She wanted to verbally break me down in front of the entire family to assert her absolute dominance. She stood up from the sofa, smoothed down the front of her bright yellow dress, and marched directly over to where I was sitting in the shade. Charmaine Auntie Valerie barked sharply, standing directly over my lounge chair, with her hands planted firmly on her wide hips. "Put that drink down and get up. You have been sitting here acting like a pampered guest for the past 30 minutes while my brother is sweating over a hot grill cooking your food." I slowly lowered my crystal glass of sparkling water, completely unbothered by her aggressive tone. I looked up at her, keeping my facial expression entirely blank. "Is there something you need, Valerie?" "I need you to act like a decent human being," she snapped viciously, her voice carrying across the entire backyard. The casual conversations on the patio immediately ceased. Uncle Darnell stopped talking. The cousins turned their heads to watch the unfolding drama. Even Jamal froze at the grill, the metal tongs hovering nervously over the open flames. "You need to walk over to that grill, fix your husband a massive plate of food, and loudly thank him for providing this beautiful home for you," Auntie Valerie demanded, pointing a long, perfectly manicured finger directly at my face. "And then you need to stand right here in front of this entire family and issue a deep, sincere apology to my niece Kiara. You ruined her international trip. You abandoned her in an empty house and you stole her dogs. You are going to apologize to her right now, or you can pack your bags and leave this family forever." The entire backyard fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The only sound was the quiet crackling of the charcoal burning in the grill and the gentle rustling of the leaves in the warm summer breeze. Every single pair of eyes was completely locked onto my emerald green suit. They were all eagerly waiting for me to finally crack. They wanted me to yell, to cry, to furiously defend myself so they could label me as the crazy, hysterical woman. I took a slow, deep breath of the fresh summer air. I gently placed my crystal glass down onto the small table next to me. I stood up smoothly, adjusting the sharp lapels of my tailored silk jacket. I looked at Auntie Valerie, then I looked past her to Kiara, who was smirking triumphantly in her chair. Finally, my eyes locked directly onto Jamal. He looked absolutely terrified, his face pale and shining with cold sweat. He knew exactly what was hiding behind my calm demeanor. "You know what, Valerie?" I said, my voice carrying a crystal clear, chillingly polite resonance that echoed perfectly across the quiet patio. "You are absolutely right. The time for apologies and ultimate truths has definitely arrived. But before I fix anyone a plate, there is a very brief piece of audio I think the entire family really needs to hear. It will explain everything about my trip to Paris, the dogs, and exactly who provides this beautiful home." I reached into my designer pocket and pulled out my smartphone. The barbecue was officially over. The execution had begun. I stood perfectly still in the center of my expansive stone patio. The heavy, suffocating tension in the air was palpable. Auntie Valerie was still glaring at me, her hands planted firmly on her hips, completely expecting me to finally break down and apologize. Uncle Darnell was smirking from the outdoor kitchen, leaning against the granite counter with a cold beer in his hand, waiting for the wealthy software engineer to submit to her broke husband. The younger cousins were watching with eager anticipation. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of anger or distress. I simply reached over to the small wrought iron table next to me and picked up my crystal glass of sparkling water. I pulled a silver spoon from the nearby appetizer tray and gently clinked it against the side of the delicate crystal. The sharp, clear, ringing sound instantly cut through the thick silence of the backyard. It was a highly refined, incredibly polite demand for absolute attention. I opened the smart home control application on my phone. When I built this outdoor entertainment space, I spared absolutely no expense. I had installed a state-of-the-art, high-fidelity surround sound system. There were premium Bluetooth speakers discreetly hidden inside the stone columns under the eaves of the covered patio, and disguised as decorative rocks throughout the pristine landscaping. I quickly paired my smartphone to the master channel and pushed the master volume slider directly to the maximum level. "I want to make sure everyone in the back can hear this clearly," I announced, my voice completely serene. I opened the security camera application, navigated to the saved video clips, and pressed play on the high-definition recording from my living room. The pristine, crystal-clear audio instantly blasted through the massive outdoor speaker system. It was so incredibly loud and perfectly balanced that it sounded like Jamal and Kiara were standing right there in the middle of the grass, speaking into professional microphones. First, the sound of the heavy front door opening echoed across the yard. Then came Kiara's highly distinctive, whining voice. "This is completely ruined," Kiara's recorded voice blared through the speakers, her entitled tone unmistakable. "I cannot believe that selfish witch actually canceled the flights. What am I supposed to do now?" Auntie Valerie's smug expression instantly flickered. She looked confused, her eyes darting around the yard trying to locate the source of the sound. Then Jamal's panicked, exhausted voice joined the broadcast. "Keep your voice down, Kiara." The recording played loudly. "I am trying to think. I am trying to figure out how to fix this massive disaster." "How are you going to fix this, Kiara?" yelled on the recording. "Because of her, I cannot meet Mom in Italy. You promised me. Mom is already waiting in Venice right now. She flew out there yesterday. You promised we were going to meet her." The absolute second the word "mom" blasted through the surround sound speakers, the entire atmosphere of the backyard fundamentally shifted. The smug, arrogant smirk completely vanished from Uncle Darnell's face. The cousins sitting on the lounge furniture suddenly sat up straight, their eyes widening in sheer shock. But the recording was not finished. The most devastating piece of evidence was yet to come. "I know what I promised," Jamal hissed fiercely on the pristine audio track. "But Charmaine canceled the entire itinerary. The hotel is gone. The flights are gone. I was supposed to wire your mother the $100,000 from our joint savings account the absolute second we landed in Venice. It was supposed to look like an international business investment. If I move that massive amount of money right now, while Charmaine is angry and watching the accounts, she will get an immediate fraud alert." I hit the pause button on my phone screen. The audio immediately cut out, plunging the entire backyard into a deep, heavy, absolute silence. It was the kind of terrifying silence that follows a massive explosion. You could have heard a single leaf hit the grass. The physical reactions happening around me were absolutely priceless. I wanted to frame every single one of their faces and hang them in a museum. Uncle Darnell, the man who had just proudly told Jamal to cut off my spending money and show me who was boss, stood completely frozen at the outdoor kitchen. His jaw was hanging wide open, his grip on his cold glass bottle of beer completely loosened. The bottle slipped right through his fingers, plummeting toward the stone patio. It hit the hard ground with a loud, violent crash, shattering into dozens of sharp pieces. The cheap beer splashed aggressively over his expensive leather shoes, but he did not even flinch or look down. He simply stared at Jamal with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. Auntie Valerie looked as if someone had just physically slapped her across the face with a heavy brick. The loud, overbearing matriarch, who always defended her precious brother, was entirely speechless. Her mouth repeatedly opened and closed, like a fish suffocating on dry land, but absolutely no sound came out. The bright yellow of her sundress suddenly seemed to mock the sickeningly pale shade her face had just turned. She slowly turned her head to look at Jamal, her eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of deep betrayal and profound embarrassment. The younger cousins were whispering frantically among themselves, completely scandalized. They were all staring at Kiara, who had shrunk down so deep into her patio chair that she practically disappeared. All the color had completely drained from her face. Her smartphone rested completely forgotten in her lap. She knew she was caught. She knew the entire family just heard her actively participating in a massive financial conspiracy against the woman who had fully funded her entire life. And then there was Jamal. Jamal was still standing behind the massive stainless steel grill. He looked like a man facing a firing squad. The metal tongs he had been holding clattered loudly onto the granite countertop. Sweat was pouring down his face in thick, heavy sheets. His carefully constructed facade of male dominance and wealthy authority had just been completely vaporized in front of his entire family. He had proudly told them he bought this house. He told them he was the primary provider. He told them I was just a crazy, jealous wife throwing a petty tantrum. And in less than 2 minutes, my audio recording had unequivocally proved that he was a broke, manipulative liar trying to steal $100,000 from his successful wife to fund the woman he used to be married to. I slipped my phone back into my designer pocket, smoothed out the front of my emerald green silk suit, and looked directly at Auntie Valerie. "So, Valerie," I said, my voice cutting through the silent tension like a freshly sharpened blade. "You wanted me to apologize to Kiara for ruining her trip to Europe. Should I apologize to her mother as well? Should I write a formal apology letter to the ex-wife waiting in Venice for the $100,000 my husband planned to steal from my corporate trust account? Please guide me. You are the moral authority of this family, after all. What is the proper submissive wife protocol for funding your husband's secret European rendezvous with his former spouse?" Auntie Valerie swallowed hard. For the very first time since I had met her, she completely averted her eyes and looked down at the ground. She had absolutely nothing to say. Jamal finally snapped out of his terrified paralysis. Desperation, wild and uncontrollable, completely took over his brain. He lunged forward, slamming his hands down onto the granite counter. "That is a complete lie!" Jamal screamed, his voice cracking into a high, hysterical pitch. His eyes were wide and frantic as he looked around the yard, desperately trying to find a single sympathetic face among his family members. He pointed a violently shaking finger directly at me. "Do not listen to her. She is lying. That recording is completely fake." He stepped out from behind the grill, waving his arms frantically. "It is artificial intelligence," Jamal yelled loudly, pacing back and forth like a trapped animal. "She is a senior software engineer. She knows how to use computers to do all sorts of crazy things. She used artificial intelligence to clone my voice and Kiara's voice. She fabricated that entire conversation just to make me look bad in front of all of you. I would never steal money. I would never talk to my ex-wife. It is a deep fake setup." I stood there and actually let him ramble for a few more seconds. Watching him desperately grasp at such incredibly absurd, ridiculous straws was truly the most entertaining part of my entire week. He was sweating profusely, his chest heaving as he tried to convince his highly skeptical uncle and his humiliated sister that a piece of futuristic technology had framed him. I let out a loud, genuine laugh. It was a rich, full sound of pure amusement that echoed brightly across the patio. "Jamal," I said, shaking my head slowly in absolute pity, "you truly are grasping at straws now." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. He instinctively took a step back, visibly shrinking under my intense gaze. "You want these people to believe that I spent hours sitting in a hotel room in Paris, coding an artificial intelligence voice cloning program just to frame you at a Sunday barbecue?" I asked, my voice dripping with heavy, undisguised sarcasm. "Jamal, you cannot even figure out how to program the digital clock on our microwave. You call me at my corporate office twice a month because you forget how to connect your phone to the living room television. You do not even know what a router is. Do you honestly expect anyone standing in this backyard to believe that you have the slightest clue how artificial intelligence actually works?" A few of the younger cousins actually let out small, muffled snorts of laughter. It was true, and every single person in that family knew it. Jamal was notoriously terrible with technology. His defense was incredibly pathetic and insulting to everyone's intelligence. "But I am not finished, Jamal." I continued, my voice dropping an octave into a cold, lethal tone. "Because while you were busy playing the big wealthy provider in front of Uncle Darnell and Auntie Valerie, my corporate attorney was extremely busy finalizing the paperwork for your departure." Jamal's eyes darted frantically around the yard. He looked at Uncle Darnell silently, begging for backup. But Darnell just crossed his arms over his chest and turned his head away in complete disgust. Jamal looked at Auntie Valerie, but she was staring angrily at Kiara, clearly realizing that the spoiled niece she had been viciously defending all week was fully complicit in this massive scam. "You see, I did not just cancel a luxury trip to Italy," I announced to the completely silent audience. "I canceled your entire free ride. The bank accounts you thought you had access to are completely locked inside my corporate trust." The Range Rover you loved showing off was repossessed by my fleet management team. And that expensive pet resort you bragged about earlier. I used your secret personal credit card to pay for it. The one you keep hidden from your sister so she does not ask you for loans. You are completely maxed out, Jamal. You have absolutely nothing left. The financial reality finally crashed down on him with the full weight of a falling building. His knees actually buckled slightly. He reached out and grabbed the edge of a patio chair just to keep himself from collapsing onto the stone floor. The grand, arrogant patriarch was gone. In his place stood a broken, exposed fraud who had just lost access to millions of dollars because he got entirely too greedy. The climax of my revenge had arrived, but the final devastating blow was currently waiting quietly out front. The grand finale of this Sunday barbecue was about to roll right up my driveway. Jamal stared at me, his chest heaving desperately, trying to salvage whatever tiny shred of dignity he had left. The terrified, panicked look suddenly vanished from his face, replaced by a forced, highly unnatural burst of manic laughter. It was a loud, grating sound that made everyone on the patio deeply uncomfortable. He slapped his hand against his thigh and shook his head, looking around at his family as if we were all just participating in a mildly amusing misunderstanding. "Well, you know what?" Charmaine Jamal chuckled nervously, aggressively, wiping the thick sweat from his forehead. "You got me. You caught me trying to help out my former wife with a small business loan. I should have told you, but it honestly does not matter. We are legally married. We live in a marital property state. Half of that massive savings account is legally mine anyway. If you want to play dirty, I will just take my rightful half right now. I am transferring my $50,000 into my private checking account this exact second." He aggressively yanked his smartphone out of his pocket, his fingers trembling wildly as he swiped to unlock his screen. He held the phone up high, making sure Uncle Darnell and Auntie Valerie could clearly see he was taking definitive action. He was trying to prove that he still possessed ultimate financial power, that he could effortlessly seize his assets with a single tap of his thumb. "Go ahead, Jamal," I said softly, crossing my arms and tilting my head. "Show everyone your immense wealth. Transfer the money." He furiously tapped the banking application icon. The blue loading circle spun for a few seconds. The entire family held their collective breath, watching his face intently. Uncle Darnell leaned forward, practically salivating at the idea of Jamal successfully taking thousands of dollars from me. The application finally loaded. I watched the exact physiological response ripple through Jamal's entire body as his eyes registered the numbers on the glowing screen. His forced smile did not just fade, it violently collapsed. His jaw went completely slack. His eyes bulged out of his head so far I thought they might actually pop. He frantically tapped the screen, aggressively swiping his thumb downward to refresh the page. The blue circle spun again. The screen reloaded. It still displayed a flat, unforgiving zero balance. "There is nothing here," Jamal whispered, his voice completely devoid of any breath. He tapped the screen harder, nearly cracking the glass. "It says 0. Where is my money, Charmaine? Where is my money?" "It was never your money, Jamal," I explained, my voice perfectly calm and delightfully articulate. "It was my money, generated by my highly successful software company, which is entirely protected under my limited liability company." I took a slow, commanding step toward the center of the patio, addressing not just Jamal, but his entire audience of toxic relatives. Auntie Valerie was watching me with wide, fearful eyes, finally realizing she was dealing with a woman who operated on an entirely different intellectual level. "You see, Jamal always loved to brag about our joint savings account," I announced clearly, "but he possesses zero understanding of high-level corporate wealth structuring. That account was merely a digital sweep account. Every single penny was technically owned by my primary business trust. When I made a single phone call from my luxury hotel suite in Paris, my wealth manager instantly severed the digital mirror. Your access was permanently revoked. The funds were secured behind a corporate firewall. You cannot transfer a single dime, Jamal, because your name holds absolutely no legal weight." Jamal was shaking his head violently, refusing to accept the devastating reality. But the prenuptial agreement, he stammered defensively. The lawyer said whatever we saved together was marital property. You cannot just hide it in a company. I absolutely can, and I absolutely did, I countered sharply. Because you fundamentally violated the core fidelity clauses of our ironclad prenuptial agreement. My attorney drafted that contract specifically to protect me from financial predators. The absolute second you attempted to secretly divert marital assets to your former spouse, you triggered the maximum penalty clause. You forfeited your right to any alimony, any spousal support, and any share of the shared liquid assets. You are walking away from this 5-year marriage with the exact same amount of money you brought into it. Absolutely nothing. The sheer finality of my words struck the patio like a lightning bolt. Uncle Darnell let out a low whistle, slowly stepping entirely away from Jamal, as if my husband had suddenly contracted a highly contagious disease. In Darnell's extremely transactional mind, a man without money was a man without any value. Auntie Valerie pressed her hand against her chest, her mouth hanging open. She had spent years telling everyone how Jamal had graciously elevated my life, and now she was staring at the undeniable proof that Jamal was nothing more than a glorified parasite who had just been forcefully detached from his host. Kiara finally stood up from her chair. She was trembling, looking at her father with an expression of pure horror. "Dad," Kiara cried out, her voice trembling with panic. "What is she talking about? What do you mean you have no money? How are we supposed to pay for the dogs? How are we going to pay for my apartment next month? You promised you were going to pay my rent." Jamal could not even look at his daughter. He just stared blankly at the stone patio, his shoulders completely slumped in absolute irreversible defeat. He was thoroughly broken. Right on cue, a loud, heavy rumbling sound echoed from the front of the property. The distinct noise of large diesel engines shifting gears and heavy air brakes hissing filled the quiet suburban air. The sound was so massive and disruptive that several of the cousins actually stood up and walked toward the side gate to see what was happening out in the street. "That would be my grand finale," I announced, gesturing elegantly toward the front of the house. "I suggest we all move to the front yard. You are not going to want to miss this." Auntie Valerie and Uncle Darnell exchanged highly nervous glances, but their overwhelming curiosity forced them to follow me. Jamal trailed behind them, slowly walking like a condemned man heading toward the gallows. Kiara followed close behind her father, clutching her smartphone to her chest like a protective shield. We walked through the side gate and stepped out onto the lush green grass of my expansive front lawn. Parked directly against the curb, completely blocking the front of my pristine estate, were two massive commercial-sized moving trucks. Their engines were idling loudly, sending thick plumes of exhaust into the summer air. But it was the vehicle parked directly behind the moving trucks that made Jamal stop dead in his tracks. A highly polished black and white county sheriff's cruiser was idling perfectly in my driveway. The bright blue and red light bar on the roof was gently flashing, reflecting off the front windows of my house. A uniformed sheriff's deputy stepped out of the cruiser, adjusting his heavy duty belt, and stood professionally by the front door. He was not there to arrest anyone. He was there to perform a civil standby to ensure absolute peace was maintained during a lawful property eviction. Jamal looked at the moving trucks, then looked at the armed deputy, and finally turned his terrified eyes toward me. "What is this, Charmaine?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What are you doing?" I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. I had received it via private courier less than an hour before arriving at the house. I walked directly up to Jamal and forcefully slapped the thick envelope right into his chest. He reflexively brought his hands up to catch it before it fell to the grass. "Inside that envelope, you will find the officially filed divorce petition," I explained loudly, making sure every single family member standing on the lawn could hear the exact legal terms of his destruction. "You will also find a legally binding commercial notice to quit the premises." Jamal stared down at the brown envelope as if it were a highly explosive bomb. "A notice to quit," he repeated numbly. "You are evicting me. You cannot evict me from my own house." "It is not your house, Jamal," I reminded him, my voice completely devoid of any pity. "It is a corporate asset wholly owned by my limited liability company. Your name is nowhere on the deed, nowhere on the mortgage, and nowhere on the property tax records. You are legally classified as a month-to-month residential tenant, and as the sole managing member of the holding company, I am officially terminating your residency, effective immediately. I turned my attention to Kiara, who was standing frozen on the grass, her eyes wide with sheer panic. That eviction notice applies to you as well, Kiara. You have caused severe documented property damage to my custom furniture by intentionally abandoning your untrained animals inside my home. That violates the implied terms of your residency here. I looked back at Jamal, whose face was completely pale. The professional movers standing by those trucks have been fully retained by my corporate office. They are here to quickly and efficiently pack your personal belongings. You have exactly 2 hours to gather your clothes, your cheap golf clubs, and whatever fake luxury items you purchased with your secret emergency credit card. When the 2 hours are up, the sheriff's deputy will legally escort you and your daughter off my private property. If you refuse to leave, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing. The sheer magnitude of the situation finally shattered Jamal's last remaining shred of denial. He was losing his wealthy wife, his luxury home, his access to millions of dollars, and his flawless reputation all in a single devastating afternoon. "Charmaine, please!" Jamal begged, his voice cracking into a loud, pathetic sob. He actually dropped down onto his knees right there on the perfectly manicured grass. Tears began streaming down his face. "You cannot do this. I have nowhere to go. I have no money. You cannot just throw me out into the street. We are a family." I looked down at the man kneeling in the grass. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no regret, just a deep, profound sense of finality. "I suggest you stop crying and start packing, Jamal," I said coldly. "The clock is officially ticking." I turned away from him and looked directly at Auntie Valerie and Uncle Darnell. They were standing near the driveway looking absolutely horrified by the complete destruction of their golden boy. They had spent years disrespecting me, constantly elevating Jamal at my expense. Now, the heavy burden of his failures was about to fall squarely onto their shoulders. "Well, Auntie Valerie," I smiled brightly, "it looks like Jamal and Kiara are going to need a place to stay tonight. I hope you have plenty of room at your house. And Darnell, you might want to open your wallet. He is definitely going to need a substantial loan." Uncle Darnell aggressively shook his head, taking several steps backward toward his own vehicle. "Absolutely not," Darnell barked loudly. "I am not taking in a grown man who cannot even manage his own household. He made his bed, he can sleep in it. Do not look at me, Jamal." Auntie Valerie looked equally disgusted. She clutched her oversized purse tightly against her chest. "I cannot take them in." Valerie stammered quickly. "My house is completely full. I have my own problems to deal with. Jamal, you need to figure this out on your own. You brought this great shame onto our family." The ultimate betrayal was complete. The exact same toxic family members who had loudly cheered him on and encouraged his arrogant behavior were now actively abandoning him the absolute second his bank accounts ran dry. They scattered like roaches when the kitchen lights turned on, rushing toward their cars to escape the massive fallout. I turned my back on all of them, walked gracefully past the armed deputy, and stepped inside my beautiful, quiet home. The financial guillotine had dropped perfectly, completely severing the dead weight from my life. I stood perfectly still in the cool, air-conditioned sanctuary of my grand foyer. Through the massive custom glass panels of my front doors, I possessed a flawless, unobstructed view of the absolute carnage unfolding on my front lawn. The financial guillotine had dropped, and now the messy, chaotic reality of the execution was playing out exactly as I had orchestrated. Jamal was still kneeling on the pristine grass, his head bowed, looking like a shattered monument to male arrogance. But the real show was Auntie Valerie. For years, she had championed Jamal as the absolute pinnacle of success in their family. She had used his fake wealth to elevate her own social status at church and in their community. Now that the illusion was violently ripped away, her survival instincts kicked into high gear. She needed to immediately distance herself from the radioactive fallout of his massive failure. Auntie Valerie marched right up to where Jamal was kneeling. She did not offer him a comforting hand. She did not kneel beside him to wipe his tears. She stood over him, her shadow completely enveloping his broken frame, and she delivered a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "I always knew you were no good." Jamal, Auntie Valerie screamed, her shrill voice easily penetrating the thick glass of my front doors. "You have brought a disgusting, unforgivable shame upon this entire family today. You lied to us. You paraded around here acting like a wealthy king, making us all look like absolute fools while you were secretly plotting to steal from your own wife. You are a complete disgrace to the way our parents raised us." Jamal slowly lifted his head, his eyes red and swollen. "Valerie, please," he croaked, his voice cracking pitifully. "I am your brother. I have nowhere to go. I just need a place to sleep for a few weeks until I figure this out. Just let Kiara and me stay in your guest room." Auntie Valerie violently recoiled, stepping back as if Jamal had just lunged at her. "Absolutely not," she barked loudly, waving her hands defensively in the air. "Do not you dare ask to sleep on my couch. Do not even think about bringing your broke, scheming self to my house. I have a reputation to uphold in my neighborhood. I am not harboring a financial predator. You got yourself into this massive mess and you can sleep on the street for all I care." With that final devastating declaration, Auntie Valerie spun around, her bright yellow sundress flaring out dramatically. She marched aggressively toward her car, aggressively ordering the rest of the cousins to follow her immediately. Within exactly 3 minutes, the entire toxic audience had completely abandoned the premises. The driveway was empty of their vehicles. They left Jamal and Kiara entirely alone on the grass with the armed sheriff's deputy and the idling moving trucks. The sheer isolation of that moment finally broke whatever remaining defiance Kiara possessed. She had been standing frozen on the lawn, staring at her smartphone as if it held the magical answer to her suddenly destroyed life. When she realized her beloved Auntie Valerie had just ruthlessly abandoned them, the panic fully consumed her. Kiara suddenly broke into a sprint, running across the grass and rushing straight toward my front door. I did not lock it. I stood my ground in the foyer as she burst through the doorway, her face stained with fresh tears and her oversized designer sunglasses sitting crookedly on her head. Charmaine Kiara gasped, breathing heavily as she stopped a few feet away from me. "You have to help me. You have to undo this right now." I crossed my arms over my emerald green silk suit and tilted my head, looking at her with mild, detached curiosity. "Help you with what, Kiara? Your father is the one who handles the family emergencies. You should ask him." "He has absolutely nothing," Kiara cried out, her voice rising to a hysterical screech. "I just called the Paws and Pearls Pet Resort. I told them I was coming to pick up my dogs, and the manager told me the bill was over $3,000. They said because the credit card on file was maxed out. They will not release the animals to me until the remaining balance and the early termination fees are paid in cash. I do not have $3,000. My father does not have $3,000. They are going to keep my dogs." She took a desperate step closer to me, aggressively clasping her hands together in a pleading gesture. "You have to pay the bill, Charmaine. Please. You have millions of dollars. $3,000 is absolutely nothing to you. You cannot just leave my innocent fur babies in that place. They need me. I need them for my social media content. My followers are going to notice if I stop posting them." I stared at her, genuinely amazed that even in the absolute lowest moment of her entire life, her primary concern was still her fake internet presence. She was actively being evicted, her father was ruined, and she was worried about her follower count. It was the exact same toxic entitlement that allowed her to aggressively snatch my passport at the airport just days prior. I slowly uncrossed my arms and offered her a small, razor-sharp smile. "Should have gone to Venice, sweetie." Kiara's jaw dropped open. She stared at me, completely stunned by the cold, absolute finality of my response. "But I love those dogs," she whispered, tears spilling over her eyelashes. "If you truly loved them, you would have actually trained them," I replied smoothly. "You would not have maliciously abandoned them inside my home to destroy my custom velvet furniture. You made your choices, Kiara. Now you get to live with the incredibly expensive consequences. The pet resort is a highly reputable business. If you abandon the dogs there, They will simply rehome them to a wealthy family who can actually afford to take care of them. I suggest you go outside and start packing your clothes. You have exactly 1 hour and 45 minutes left. I turned my back on her completely and walked confidently toward the kitchen to pour myself a fresh glass of sparkling water. I could hear Kiara let out a loud, frustrated scream of pure defeat before she finally turned around and stomped back outside to join her father. The next 2 hours were an absolute masterclass in professional efficiency. My retained moving team was incredibly fast and entirely unsympathetic to Jamal's continuous crying. They marched into the house carrying massive stacks of heavy-duty industrial black trash bags. Jamal attempted to instruct the movers to carefully pack his suits into the expensive custom Italian leather luggage set stored in the master bedroom closet. The lead mover simply looked at his clipboard, looked back at Jamal, and shook his head. "I am sorry, sir," the mover said in a gruff, entirely professional tone. The property owner provided us with a highly specific, legally binding inventory list of items that belong exclusively to her corporate entity. That includes all luxury luggage, electronics, and high-end furniture. You are only permitted to remove your personal clothing, your shoes, and your basic toiletries. Jamal was forced to watch in utter humiliation as the movers aggressively shoved his expensive tailored suits, his golf polos, and his designer shoes directly into thick black trash bags. They tied the tops of the bags into tight knots and tossed them unceremoniously onto the front porch. Kiara received the exact same brutal treatment. Her massive collection of cheap, fast fashion clothing and her ridiculous influencer lighting equipment were unceremoniously dumped into trash bags. They looked absolutely ridiculous. Just hours ago, they were loudly bragging to their family about their immense wealth and power. Now they were standing on the front porch of a multi-million-dollar estate, completely surrounded by dozens of black garbage bags, looking exactly like the broke entitled squatters they truly were. When the 2-hour time limit officially expired, the sheriff's deputy stepped up to the porch. He placed his hand casually on his utility belt and nodded firmly toward the street. "Time is up, folks," the deputy announced clearly. "You need to vacate the premises immediately. If you step foot on this property again, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing. Do you have a ride coming to collect you and your belongings?" Jamal had been frantically tapping on his smartphone for the past 20 minutes. Because all of his premium credit cards were frozen and his personal debit card was completely empty, he could not afford to call a luxury black car service. He could not even afford a standard taxi. He had been forced to use a discounted ride-sharing application, cashing in promotional coupons just to secure the absolute cheapest economy ride available. A heavily dented, incredibly dirty compact sedan slowly pulled up to the curb, parking directly behind the massive moving trucks. The exhaust pipe rattled loudly, emitting a thin stream of dark smoke. The driver rolled down his window, looking highly confused at the massive pile of garbage bags sitting on the pristine front porch. Jamal picked up 2 heavy trash bags, his face burning a deep, humiliated red. He practically dragged them across the lush green lawn, completely unable to look the sheriff's deputy in the eye. Kiara followed behind him, sobbing loudly, carrying her own trash bags over her shoulder. As they approached the curb, Jamal's eyes instinctively darted toward the empty space in the driveway, where he usually parked his beloved corporate vehicle. The realization that he would never again sit behind the wheel of that fully loaded premium Range Rover seemed to hit him harder than the divorce papers. He had used that specific car to project an aura of absolute dominance and success to the entire world. Now he was desperately trying to shove heavy plastic garbage bags into the tiny stained trunk of a 20-year-old economy car. The rideshare driver actually had to get out and help them aggressively cram the bags into the back seat, because the trunk was completely full. Kiara was forced to squeeze herself into the tiny space in the back, sitting uncomfortably with a trash bag full of shoes resting heavily on her lap. Jamal slumped into the front passenger seat, staring blankly ahead at the dashboard. I stood gracefully on my front porch, holding my crystal glass, and watched the cheap little car slowly putter away down the beautiful tree-lined street. They completely disappeared around the corner, taking all the toxic noise, the manipulation, and the blatant disrespect with them. The heavy, suffocating shadow that had loomed over my life for the past 5 years was permanently gone. My kingdom was finally unequivocally mine again. 6 months have passed since that spectacular Sunday afternoon. Half a year since the commercial moving trucks pulled away from the curb and took the heavy, exhausting burden of Jamal and his entitled daughter entirely out of my existence. The subsequent divorce proceedings were swift, ruthless, and entirely in my favor, because of the ironclad prenuptial agreement and the overwhelmingly clear, documented evidence of his financial infidelity. The judge did not hesitate for a single second to grant my legal requests. Jamal walked out of the downtown courthouse with absolutely nothing but the clothes we had stuffed into those black garbage bags and a massive, crushing mountain of legal debt. My sprawling colonial estate has never felt more peaceful or more thoroughly cleansed. I immediately replaced the ruined velvet sofa with an even more expensive custom-imported Italian leather sectional. The silence in my home is no longer a suffocating sign of tension. It is the sweet, vibrant, daily musical sound of absolute freedom. The universe has a beautiful, highly efficient way of balancing the scales of justice and karma. Absolutely did not miss a single solitary beat when it came to Jamal. You cannot pretend to be a wealthy financial genius while actively destroying your own credit behind closed doors. When the massive luxury pet resort bill hit his secret emergency credit card, he could not pay it. The late fees compounded aggressively. When his corporate access was permanently severed, he had to take out desperate high-interest payday loans just to secure a basic rental deposit for a place to live. Eventually, his retail bank ran a routine employee financial background check. In the corporate banking industry, a sudden massive drop in a branch manager's credit score is an immediate, glaring red flag for potential internal fraud and severe financial instability. They did not fire him outright, but they severely and publicly demoted him. The arrogant, boastful man, who used to wear expensive tailored suits and sit back lazily in a plush corner office, is now working as a basic entry-level bank teller. He stands behind a thick pane of smudged bulletproof glass for 8 grueling hours a day. He spends his time counting out wrinkled $20 bills and cashing small checks for the exact same local community members he used to actively look down upon. He is forced to wear a cheap, ill-fitting standard-issue uniform polo shirt, completely stripped of his former glory. His new living situation is even more poetic in its absolute misery. Jamal and Kiara are currently crammed into a tiny, poorly ventilated 2-bedroom apartment located right next to a loud, incredibly busy industrial highway. Uncle Darnell and Auntie Valerie completely cut them off, refusing to offer a single dime of financial assistance or even return their phone calls. They are entirely on their own. And Kiara quickly discovered the harsh reality that the glamorous life of a social media influencer requires actual liquid capital. Without my corporate credit cards to mindlessly fund her designer shopping hauls, her expensive weekend brunch outings, and her highly curated luxury vacations, her meager internet following completely evaporated. The algorithm completely forgot she ever existed. Reality hit Kiara like a massive high-speed freight train. Because she had never bothered to get a college degree or develop a single marketable professional skill, she was forced to enter the basic labor workforce. She now works full-time at a cheap fast fashion retail store in a dying suburban shopping mall. The spoiled girl who once loudly scoffed at anything without a high-end luxury designer label now spends 40 hours a week under harsh fluorescent lights, aggressively folding cheap polyester shirts and dealing with incredibly rude, highly demanding customers. At the end of her grueling minimum wage, shifts her feet aching and her pride completely shattered. She has to take the public city bus back to that cramped, noisy apartment. And the absolute best part of her daily punishment is waiting right inside that cheap apartment door. Those 3 chaotic, entirely untrained French bulldogs are still living right there with them. Without the massive square footage and the pristine backyard of my estate, the dogs have completely overrun the tiny living space. I heard through the distant family grapevine that their new landlord is already threatening them with a formal eviction because of the constant deafening barking and the overwhelming, inescapable smell of pet waste soaking into the cheap carpets. They are entirely trapped in a miserable, suffocating cage of their own making. Meanwhile, my own life has ascended to an entirely new, breathtaking stratosphere of success. Stripping away the heavy, toxic anchor of that marriage unlocked a profound level of professional focus and creative energy I never even knew I possessed. Without Jamal constantly draining my emotional reserves and my financial accounts, I poured everything I had directly into my software development firm. Over the past 6 months, my business has completely doubled in revenue. We secured 3 massive corporate contracts that effectively cemented my company as an undisputed global industry leader. I am no longer just a successful woman living in Atlanta. I am a highly sought-after, internationally recognized chief executive officer. Right now, I am standing on the sweeping glass balcony of a massive penthouse suite at the Burj Al Arab in Dubai. The warm, fragrant desert wind is blowing gently through my hair, and the sparkling blue waters of the Arabian Gulf stretch out endlessly before me. I am fully funding and hosting an exclusive high-level corporate retreat for my top-tier executive team. We just finished a spectacular private dinner in the sky, raising crystal glasses to toast our massive financial milestones. I am wearing a breathtaking custom silk gown, holding a glass of the finest vintage champagne, and watching the magnificent city lights glitter brightly below me. I built this beautiful life from the ground up. Every single luxury, every single triumph, every single moment of profound, unbreakable peace belongs entirely to me. I survived the ultimate betrayal. I legally protected my empire with ruthless precision, and I emerged stronger, wealthier, and infinitely more untouchable than ever before. Family is supposed to be your safe haven, not a heist crew waiting for you to drop your guard. When they show you who they are, don't argue. Just upgrade your flight, secure your LLC, and let the trash take itself out. Who else has had to legally outsmart a toxic partner? Sound off in the comments, hit subscribe, and remember, never let anyone dim your black girl magic.